I never thought a graveyard could feel alive. Not in the way a crowded street thrums with energy or a forest whispers with wind through leaves. No, this kind of life is different. Quiet, patient, watching. That's what hit me the first night I was assigned to the night shift. The old cemetery on the edge of town, the one no one visits after dark, felt like it had been waiting for me, or maybe waiting for anyone, for years. I pulled up in my sheriff's cruiser, headlights cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in off the river. It clung to everything: headstones, iron gates, even the low-hanging branches that bent like tired arms over the gravel path. I shut the door, and the world outside went mute, swallowed by the fog and the sound of my own boots crunching against the gravel. There were no animals stirring, no wind beyond the faint sighing in the trees, just a hollow echo of my own steps. The reports had been strange. Vandalism mostly. Headstones tipped over. Flowers torn. Iron fences scratched like someone or something had passed through in a hurry. No one ever saw anyone, but the damage was there, stark and deliberate. I had been on patrol for 10 years, and this kind of thing still made my gut tighten. There's something about defaced graves that hits differently. It's not just property damage. It feels like someone is mocking the dead, mocking you, mocking the boundary between the living and what lies beneath. The main gate creaked as I pushed it open. The rust had eaten away at the hinges, leaving it stubborn and reluctant, like the cemetery itself was warning me to stay out. I ran my gloved hand along the iron bars. Scratch marks, deep and jagged, ran across the top edge. I traced them slowly, trying to make sense of the pattern, random, chaotic, but there was an almost mechanical precision to them. Whoever, or whatever, had done this wasn't playing. They were angry or scared, or both. I walked inside. The mist rolled around my boots, curling like smoke. The headstones jutted from the ground at odd angles, some leaning toward each other like old friends whispering secrets. The moon peeked through the clouds, thin and pale, and the shadows it cast stretched long and uncertain. I kept my flashlight in my left hand, my gun in the right, though the gun felt almost useless here. Against what? I didn't know. The air smelled cold and damp with a hint of something metallic. Iron? Blood? My stomach twisted. I told myself it was the mud in the old graves, that it was just a fog carrying scents from the nearby river. But even saying that out loud didn't make me feel better. I followed the main path, circling the older section first. Most of the graves were worn, the names barely legible. Some of the stones were cracked, moss covering the surface like green scars. A few fresh ones caught my eye. Simple markers, a single name, a date not long past. They seemed out of place, too new among the rotting granite. I made a mental note to check with the town office tomorrow, though I doubted it mattered. People died every day. But tonight, everything felt like it mattered. I passed a cluster of headstones and froze. Something moved at the edge of my vision, a flicker, like a shadow shifting too quickly to be natural. My heart thumped, the sound loud in my ears. I swung the flashlight toward it. Nothing, just the mist curling around an old oak. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But I didn't move for a moment, waiting, listening. That's when I noticed the scratches on the fence outside weren't the only ones. There were marks here too, etched into the stone of a tall monument. Faint but deliberate. I crouched, shining the beam along the lines. They were letters, crude and jagged. My stomach sank as I made them out. Leave. Not a full sentence. Just one word. Imperative. Like someone or something was giving me a warning I didn't want to hear. I stood up slowly, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. The mist had thickened, turning the cemetery into a world of gray shapes. The headstones looked like shadows of people frozen mid-motion, some leaning closer, as if curious. The wind picked up, carrying whispers. At first, I thought it was the trees. Then I realized the whispers were too close, too deliberate. Words I couldn't make out, murmurs that felt like they were just at the edge of hearing. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I moved on, trying to shake the feeling. I had a job to do, and fear wouldn't get me anywhere. I passed the mausoleum at the far end. Its doors were closed tight, rust eating the hinges just like the gate. The stone was cold gray, slick with moisture. I ran my fingers over the engraving above the door. Names, dates, decades of lives buried away, undisturbed. And yet, I felt eyes on me. I told myself it was my imagination. The path curved back toward the entrance, and that's when I heard it, a soft scraping like nails over stone. My flashlight snapped toward the sound. Nothing. The fog swallowed again. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I took a slow step forward. Then another. The scraping came again, closer this time, and my gut screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to know. I rounded a monument and froze. The iron fence, the same one I checked at the gate, had more scratches. Deeper this time, almost gouged. And behind it, faint footprints in the damp earth, small, fast, impossible to place. They led nowhere, stopping at the edge of a crypt as if whatever made them vanished into the ground. I leaned closer. The prints were fresh. My pulse hammered in my ears. A sudden gust of wind rattled the branches above. The whispers returned, more urgent, closer. I spun around, flashlight sweeping over gravestones. I should have left. My instinct screamed at me, but the sheriff in me, the part trained to investigate, to face fear head-on, kept me there. Then I heard a voice, not through the wind, not through the trees. Right next to me, soft, clear, cold, my name, Sheriff. My blood ran cold. I swung the flashlight around, hard in my throat. Nothing, just the fog, the gravestones, the night. I swallowed hard. My voice caught when I spoke. Who's there? No answer, just silence. I moved back toward the cruiser, every sense straining. The cemetery seemed to shift around me. Shapes in the fog moved with a mind of their own. I thought I saw a figure at the far end, pale and still, watching. By the time I reached the cruiser, I wasn't sure I had seen anything at all. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat for a long moment, staring at the fog-blanketed cemetery. The radio crackled to life, and a voice came through, breaking the silence. "You okay, Sheriff?" It was my deputy, probably checking in. I forced a laugh, trying to sound normal. "Yeah, just making the rounds." But I couldn't shake it. The feeling of being watched, the whispers, the scratches, they weren't random. Someone had been here tonight, and I had felt them, not a person, maybe something else. And whatever it was, it wanted me to know it had been here. I started the engine. The headlights cut a swath through the fog, illuminating the twisted shapes of the headstones one last time. I drove slowly, eyes darting to every shadow, every movement. And I realized something that made my stomach twist in ways I didn't think possible. I wasn't just patrolling the cemetery. I was part of it now, part of its night, its silence, its watching. And the night had only just begun. The fog had thickened since I left the cruiser. It rolled along the ground like smoke from a fire I couldn't see, curling around the headstones and creeping into the spaces between them. Every time I stepped, my boots sank slightly into the damp gravel, sending little clouds of mist up. I tried to tell myself it was just the night, just the weather, but the hair on the back of my neck had been on end since I left the safety of the car. I paused at a curving path, flashlight in hand, and froze. There was a sound I couldn't ignore. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not mine, not anything I recognized. Gravel shifted under some unseen weight, a soft crunch that echoed off the stones and faded too quickly, like it didn't want me to hear it. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry, and the beam of my flashlight trembled in my grip. I told myself to stay calm. I'd been on night shifts before. Criminals, drunk kids, vandals. Maybe someone had broken in again. Maybe it was nothing. But the cemetery didn't have visitors after dark. No one. The footsteps came again. Closer this time. But uneven, like whoever was walking wasn't certain of the ground, or wasn't walking normally. There was a rhythm, a pause, then a shuffle, and underneath it, faint whispers, almost imperceptible, like the wind had learned how to talk. I tilted my head, listening. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I moved forward slowly, boots crunching over the gravel, trying to match the sound, trying to see where it was coming from. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then dimmed, leaving the world around me in shadow. My heart thumped in my chest so loud I thought it might give me away. I tapped the flashlight, willing it to steady. When the beam returned, the fog had thickened and everything looked unfamiliar. Even though I had walked this path before, the whispers grew louder, though still impossible to understand. I followed the sound, tracing the edge of a row of tall headstones. That's when I saw them, boot prints in the gravel, fresh, deep, leading up to a spot between two monuments, then stopping, just stopping. No footprints beyond that, as if whoever or whatever had made them had vanished into the earth. I crouched to inspect them, my flashlight casting long, trembling shadows across the stones. There was something unnatural about the prints. The edges were too sharp, like they'd been pressed into gravel with intention, not by a careless footfall. The direction of the prints didn't make sense. Some pointed toward the road, some toward the mausoleum, and some curved back on themselves in impossible arcs, like someone had walked without moving forward. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The whispers were closer now, circling me. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing, just gravestones, twisted in gray in the moonlight. I blinked, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement, something pale just beyond the range of the light, shifting between the stones. When I focused, it was gone. I tried to speak, to call out. My voice caught in my throat. Hello? I croaked. Nothing answered, just a whispering, faint and urgent. I could feel it pressing against the edges of my mind, pulling, teasing. The fog swirled tighter, and I thought I saw shapes within it. Figures crouched behind stones, waiting, watching. I took a step back, heart hammering. The gravel shifted behind me. Footsteps again. They didn't belong to anyone walking in front of me. They were behind me now, slow, deliberate, unyielding. I spun, shining the flashlight through the mist, but it only revealed the familiar shapes of headstones and the gnarled branches of old trees. The prints in the gravel seemed to shift as I looked at them, rearranging themselves, elongating, curving in impossible ways. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet felt like they were rooted in the ground. I couldn't turn away. Whoever, or whatever, had been here wanted me to see this. I forced myself to follow the path again, eyes darting to every shadow, every shape that moved in the fog. The whispers were louder now, almost forming words, almost forming threats. Then I heard it, my name, clear, cold, right behind me. Sheriff. I swung around. Nothing, just fog, gravestones, and the iron gate far in the distance, dimly visible. My flashlight flickered again, plunging me into darkness for a heartbeat, and when it returned, I swore the shadows had shifted, stretching toward me like dark fingers. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take another step. The boot prints were there again, fresh and deep, though no one had stepped in them. I followed them through the mist, toward an area I didn't recognize. Old graves, some toppled, some broken, leaned at impossible angles, their inscriptions worn away. The whispers circled me, impossible to locate, echoing off the stones. I wanted to run, but something held me there, a mixture of fear and curiosity, the same instinct that had made me a sheriff. I stopped at a cluster of headstones and crouched, brushing my gloved hand over one of the boot prints. Gravel stuck to my fingers, cold and wet. The print was impossibly clear, like it had been pressed into the earth by a heavy weight. And then I saw it. Another set of prints, smaller, child-sized, intersecting mine in ways that made no sense. They led nowhere, just stopped, as if the child had been lifted from the ground. A sudden rustle made me jump. I swung the flashlight. A figure, pale and thin, darted between the stones. Too fast to be human. I chased it, my boots slipping in the wet gravel, heart hammering. But the figure vanished into the mist as if it had never been there. The whispers became a chorus, urgent and pressing. I pressed my hands to my ears, tried to block it out, but it seeped into my skull, whispering, calling, warning. I stumbled back, hard in my throat, and the flashlight flickered again, casting long shadows across the graves. I felt eyes on me, dozens of them, pressing through the fog. I wanted to run, wanted to get back to the cruiser, to anywhere, but my feet refused. The whispers were inside me now, cold fingers tracing along my spine, making my skin crawl. And then silence. I froze, every muscle tensed. No whispers, no footsteps, just the mist curling around the stones. I took a cautious step forward. The gravel was empty, untouched. The boot prints were gone. Everything looked as it should. I should have been relieved. I wasn't. Relief never came in a place like this. I took a deep breath, tried to steady my shaking hands. My flashlight was steady now, the beam cutting a narrow path through the fog. I followed the path back toward the cruiser, but the air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. Every step echoed, but the echoes felt wrong, stretched and hollow, like the night itself was mocking me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the footprints appear again, or the pale figure watching me. Nothing, just gravestones, twisted and leaning, blank and silent. And yet I felt them, watching, waiting. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. By the time I reached the cruiser, the fog had begun to thin, drifting like smoke in the headlights. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat, shaking, trying to catch my breath. The whispers, the footsteps, the pale shapes, they weren't gone. Not really. They lingered at the edges of my mind, pressing in, making me doubt what I had seen. I stared out at the cemetery, half expecting movement, expecting shadows to shift, expecting the impossible. But the night was still. The mist rolled over the graves like a quiet sea. The boot prints were gone. The whispers had stopped. And yet, I knew deep down that it hadn't ended. Not tonight. Not ever. I started the engine. Headlights cut through the thinning fog, illuminating the crooked stones one last time. The cemetery receded behind me, silent, watching, and I realized with a cold certainty that I hadn't just walked through the cemetery. I had walked into it, into its rules, its waiting, its darkness. And whatever had followed me, whatever had made those boot prints and whisper my name, wasn't done. The night wasn't over, and I feared I never would be either. I should have stayed in the cruiser. Every instinct I had told me to, but something kept pulling me forward. The night had a rhythm now, a heartbeat I couldn't escape. The fog hung heavier than before, curling around the old stones like thick smoke. It carried a smell this time, something rotten, something foul, and I knew it wasn't mud or leaves. It was decay, pure decay. I followed the scent, each step making my stomach twist. My flashlight cut narrow paths through the gray, illuminating toppled stones and twisted tree roots. The ground was softer here, damp, almost squishy under my boots. I froze mid-step. My light landed on a patch of disturbed earth. Fresh. I bent closer, stomach tightening. This wasn't marked on the records. No one had been buried here recently. And yet, the soil was loose, dark, and moist, as if something had been dug up or dragged out. I knelt, running my gloved fingers over the mound. Small depressions formed patterns that didn't make sense. Irregular, almost clawed. The edges of the soil were jagged, as if something had struggled to get out. My pulse accelerated. A noise made me snap upright. Gravel shifted somewhere nearby. My flashlight swung toward it, and I saw the shadows move before I could make sense of them. Something small, fast, crawling over the ground. Not human, too quick, too silent. Leaving marks that disappeared into the fog as if the earth itself swallowed them. My mouth went dry. I backed up slowly, heart hammering. The smell of decay grew stronger, filling my nostrils with every breath. It wasn't just soil or rain. It was flesh, rotten, old, and alive in its own sickening way. I tried to steady my hands, tried to convince myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. I knew that instantly, the way you know a car is about to crash before it happens. My radio crackled, static at first, sharp and jarring. Then a voice, or maybe more than one, weaving through the interference. "Sheriff." The whisper hissed, dragging the word out, calling, beckoning. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, the beam trembling. I spoke into the dark. I'm here. Who's there? Nothing. Only static. Then my name again, stretched and warped. Sure, it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. My skin crawled. I twisted in a slow circle, shining the light across the graves. Each stone was the same, gray and silent, but I felt them watching, waiting, and I knew something had moved between them. Something had crawled out. I stepped closer to the mound, trying to see more, my stomach protesting every movement. The soil was colder than it should be, almost sticky, and the impressions in the dirt looked like claws, jagged and uneven. I traced one with my finger, and a shiver ran down my spine. These weren't animal marks. Not entirely. Too deliberate. Too vicious. Another noise. Scraping. Closer this time. I swung the flashlight and caught movement at the edge of my vision. Something crawling along the ground, pale and slick, slipping between the shadows of the stones. My breath caught. I froze. It paused just at the edge of the light, and I saw it. A hand, or a claw, twisted, elongated, shiny with something dark. It disappeared before I could focus. The radio crackled again. This time, more urgent, layered with static and garbled words I almost recognized. Sheriff, leave, don't. The signal cut out, leaving only static and the echo of my own heartbeat. I press a button, voice shaky. This is Sheriff Miller. What the hell is going on? Only static answered. But I thought I heard laughter under it, dry, hollow, like air moving through empty bones. I stumbled back, boots slipping in the wet earth. My flashlight flickered again, then steadied. I scanned the area, the mound, the disturbed graves. Everything looked like it had been waiting, breathing beneath the fog. And I knew, somehow I just knew, that whatever had dug itself out of that grave wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The whispers returned, now all around me. My skin prickled, hair standing on end. They weren't calling me anymore. They were mocking me, stretching syllables of my name, twisting it into something unrecognizable. Sheriff, I backed up again, and the ground squelched beneath my boots. Another set of marks had appeared. Small, spidery tracks that led away from the mound and vanished into fog. I couldn't see where they ended. Couldn't see who or what had made them. And yet I followed them. I had to. Some part of me was drawn, sickly, toward the disturbance, toward whatever it crawled out. Each step made my stomach lurch. Each breath filled my lungs with the stench of rot. My flashlight caught the edge of something shiny, something wet and pale, slithering across a gravestone. I blinked. It was gone when I looked again. I remembered the reports from earlier, the vandalism, the scratched iron fences. I thought back to the boot prints in the gravel last night. Impossible shapes that led nowhere. And now this. My mind tried to find patterns to make sense. But the more I tried, the less it made sense. Reality felt thin, stretched, like the fog itself had teeth and eyes and was watching me struggle. I felt something brush against my leg. I jumped, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing, just a shadow, a trick of the light. Maybe, but my instinct screamed. I wasn't alone, not by a long shot. The mound called to me in a way I couldn't describe. The earth seemed to pulse under my boots, like it had a heartbeat of its own. The smell hit me again, stronger, almost unbearable. I knelt beside it, heart hammering, and saw the edges of what had been disturbed. Bones, darkened with age, half buried, broken in ways no grave should be broken. My stomach turned violently, but I couldn't look away. The clawed marks in the soil led right to them. Something moved beneath the fog, something alive, or something pretending to be. I could hear it, a squelching, sliding noise that didn't belong in this world. It wasn't human, not anymore. And then the whispers came again, louder, urgent, impossible to ignore. My name, twisted, shouted, screamed. Sheriff Miller, Sheriff. I scrambled back, trying to put distance between myself and the mound. My boots sank into the soft earth. The fog shifted, shapes forming at the edges of the light. Pale shapes, limbs stretched wrong, bending where they shouldn't. I shone the flashlight toward one, and it vanished. The radio screamed static, cutting in and out, voices calling my name from all directions. I wanted to throw it, smash it, anything, but I needed it. I needed some tether to reality. Even though reality had long left me, I ran, gravel flying beneath my boots, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The mound receded behind me, the smell of rot following, pressing into my lungs, crawling under my skin. The whispers chased me, echoing, weaving through the stones, mocking, calling. I could feel it crawling after me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Finally, I reached the cruiser, slammed the door, locked it. My hands shook so badly I dropped the flashlight. The fog rolled past, thick and impenetrable, and then, just as suddenly, silence. The whispers stopped. The static died, but the stench remained. The earth, the grave, where it crawled out, it lingered in the air, in my lungs, in the shadows of the trees. I pressed my head back against the seat, trying to breathe, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But I knew. I had seen the clawed marks. I had smelled the rot. I had heard the whispers. And I knew this was only the beginning. The night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I should have left hours ago. Every rational thought screamed at me to get in the cruiser and drive until the fog swallowed me entirely. But I couldn't. Not yet. The cemetery had a pull now. Like a heartbeat I could feel through the soles of my boots, thumping beneath the gravel, beneath the stones, beneath the soil. And something was out there, waiting for me. The mist was thicker than ever. It rolled around the old iron fence like smoke from a fire long burned out, curling in tight coils that clung to my legs and obscured my view. My flashlight flickered in the haze once, twice, then steadied, casting long, trembling beams across the twisted shapes of the headstones. And that's when I saw it. Something clinging to the fence. Pale, thin, almost human. Its limbs wrapped around the rusted bars in ways that didn't make sense, angles bending like broken twigs. The fog moved around it, but it didn't seem to breathe the same air as me. I blinked. My mind told me it was a trick, that the night was playing games, that exhaustion and fear had made shadows take form. But it didn't disappear when I focused. It mimicked me. I spoke without thinking. Who's there? It whispered back, my own voice warped high-pitched, dripping with mockery. Who's there? I stumbled backward, tripping over gravel, heart hammering. My flashlight wavered, throwing light across the fence and the twisting figure, and when it flickered, I saw its face, or at least what I thought was a face. Pale, stretched, almost skinless, hollow eyes reflecting the beam. Its mouth moved in perfect imitation of mine, echoing my fear. Every word I whispered, it whispered back, like the world itself had taken my voice and bent it. I pressed my back against a stone, tried to make sense of it. My radio squawked, static cutting through the night. I grabbed it, shaking. Dispatch! I need backup. Now! There's something here. Static swallowed my words. Then the distorted voice of thing, my voice again, overlaid with interference. Sheriff, need back up. I slammed the radio to my chest, heart hammering, and spun toward the fence. It clung there, perfectly still, eyes locked on mine. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand, catching the strange angles of its arms and the way it mirrored my movements. I raised my other hand, voice cracking. Show yourself. Whatever you are, stop hiding. It tilted its head. My words, my tone, my fear, it repeated everything. And for a second, just a second, I thought it smiled. But it wasn't a smile. It was something worse. A hollow stretching of lips, a distortion of intent, like it had taken the shape of my own terror. The whispers returned, layered and chaotic, coming from everywhere. From the fence, the gravestones, the mist itself. My name, distorted, warped, called out over and over. Sure, Riff, Sheriff. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it, but it seeped into my skull anyway, crawling along my nerves, making me dizzy, nauseous. The stench returned, stronger, fouler than before. Not just decay now, but something rancid and metallic, like iron and old blood mixed with wet soil. My stomach rolled violently, and I stumbled back. My boots slipped in the wet gravel. The thing on the fence didn't move. It just watched, breathing in a way I couldn't see, mimicking every sound I made, every movement I tried to control. I screamed a raw, ragged sound, trying to force it out of me. Stop. Leave me alone. And it screamed back. My voice, my exact voice, warped and cruel, echoing through the fog. I fell to my knees, hands clutching my ears. The whisper circled, became a storm, pressing in from all sides. The mist curled tighter, shadows twisting at the edge of the light, almost alive. I forced myself up, stumbling backward, and tripped over something soft in the gravel. My flashlight caught it. Another mound, freshly disturbed soil, darker than the surrounding earth. My stomach dropped. I had already seen what this meant. Something had come out. Something had left this grave, and now it was here, watching, waiting. I looked up at the fence again. The thing clung there, eyes hollow and unblinking, reflecting every flicker of the beam. It whispered my name again, slower this time, deliberately savoring it. Sheriff, Sheriff. I raised the radio once more, desperate. Dispatch. Please. I need backup. Do you copy? Silence. Only static. And then my voice again, mimicking me perfectly. Please, backup, Sheriff. I dropped to the gravel, shaking. My flashlight beam swept frantically, illuminating the tops of headstones, the twisted branches of trees, the fog curling around the fence. Nothing moved except that thing. Nothing breathed except that thing. And I knew, somehow, with a cold certainty, that it had been waiting for me to come closer, waiting for me to speak. I tried to remember my training, to reason, to find a plan. I could shoot, I could call again, I could run, but every rational thought dissolved under the weight of fear. I couldn't run. The fog twisted, obscured the path. I couldn't hide. It mirrored me. It knew me. The fence groaned. A long, low, terrible sound, like metal tearing under pressure. I shone my flashlight across the bars. Nothing had moved, and yet the sound persisted, vibrating through ground beneath me, resonating in my chest. My heart skipped. My fingers went numb. I tried the radio again. Dispatch. I'm at the cemetery by the north fence. Please, backup. Silence. Not just silence. A vacuum. The world had stopped breathing. The fog paused in midair, curling around the stones as if frozen. Even the thing on the fence didn't move. It just hung there, pale and still, and I could feel it, more than see it, pressing into me. I forced myself to look away, to breathe, to think, but the shadows were everywhere. My flashlight illuminated the fog ahead, and I swore I saw shapes slithering, shapes bending at impossible angles, shadows that shouldn't exist. They whispered, mimicking me again, repeating everything I thought, everything I feared. I sank to the gravel, pressed my back against a headstone, and tried to calm myself. My radio was useless. My flashlight was barely steady. My hands shook uncontrollably, and the thing on the fence, my thing, waited, watching, breathing, existing in a way that wasn't human. I remembered the reports from the previous nights. The vandals, the scratches, the boot prints, the whispers, the things that crawl from the graves. I had thought it was just mischief, just fear. I had been wrong. All wrong. This wasn't just the cemetery. It was alive, or at least aware. And it had learned me. Learned my voice, my fear, my hesitation. I screamed again. Help! Please! Somebody! The mist swallowed my voice. The radio remained silent. The fence groaned again. The figure whispered my name back, slower this time, savoring it, stretching the syllables like a living thing. I tried to run. My legs moved, but the gravel felt thick, like walking through mud. The fog seemed to thicken around me, slowing me, pressing against my chest. Every step I took, it mirrored me, twisted me, echoed my own movements back in impossible ways. And then the radio cut in briefly, static and garbled words. I thought I heard a voice, but it wasn't dispatch. It was a whisper layered over static. Sheriff, alone. then silence again. I sank to my knees, exhausted, shaking, trying to catch my breath. My flashlight flickered. I tried to stand. The fence was there. The thing was there, waiting, breathing, mocking. My name lingered in the fog. I realized then that I was completely alone. Not alone in the sense of no one else being present. Alone in the sense that nothing could reach me. Nothing could help me. And whatever this thing was, whatever clung to that fence, it was patient. I whispered my own name, almost as a test. Sheriff Miller. The thing whispered back. Sheriff Miller. My stomach rolled. My hands trembled. And I knew, with a deep, icy certainty, that the night was far from over. That the cemetery, the fence, the fog, and whatever dwelled in them had just begun. I slumped against a headstone, defeated, silent, radio dead, flashlight flickering weakly, and the whispers continued, echoing off the stones, curling in the fog, repeating my name, until all that remained was the sound of my own fear reflected back at me. The fence screamed, and I knew I was listening alone. The blackout hit just after 9. The kind of blackout that makes the town seem like it's been erased from the map, like the world outside no longer exists. My cruiser lights flickered once, twice, then died entirely. I cursed under my breath. Radio dead, street lamps dark, nothing but shadows swallowing the county jail in silence. I should have stayed in the cruiser, but the sheriff's orders were clear. Someone had to watch the old building, and tonight, that someone was me. I made my way inside, flashlight cutting narrow beams through the darkness. The jail smelled of damp concrete and old iron, like it had been holding on to secrets for decades and wasn't ready to let any of them go. My boots echoed off the floors, hollow and sharp. Each step reminded me that I was alone. That alone was a dangerous place in a building like this. The generator room was at the far end of the hall. I had never been in there before. The door was heavy, rusted along the hinges, and it groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the generator hummed faintly, sputtering now and then, lights flickering along the control panel. I pressed a hand against the wall, trying to steady myself. The hum was steady, low, like a heartbeat buried under layers of concrete and metal. But every so often it faltered, stuttering into silence, and the shadows around me seemed to twitch in response. I leaned over the control panel, checking gauges and dials. I didn't know much about this old machine, just enough to know that if it failed completely, the morgue would go dark, and I had no intention of letting that happen. The sheriff had made it clear that even in a blackout, the morgue had to stay powered. I could feel the responsibility in my chest, tight, pressing. One wrong move, and I wasn't just risking my job. I was risking something worse. The lights flickered again. My flashlight caught the generator's metal casing, and for a second, I thought I saw a shape behind it. Something pale, almost like skin pressed against the concrete wall. My stomach turned. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination, the way shadows play tricks when you're tired and nervous. I had been up for 12 hours, patrolling streets and answering calls, and now this. Old buildings, blackouts, and the hum of machines that weren't supposed to scare me, but did anyway. I walked around the generator, inspecting the panels, listening to the sputtering hum. That's when I heard it, a sound so soft I almost didn't catch it. A whisper, low, faint, curling along the concrete like smoke. I froze, heart thumping. Hello, I called, voice cracking in the empty room. Nothing, just a generator, stuttering, humming, flickering. I took a step closer to the door, trying to shake the unease. Maybe it was the wind outside, slipping through cracks, playing tricks on my ears. The hum faltered again, and then, faintly, a scrape, metal against concrete. My flashlight jerked toward it. Nothing. The shadows pressed close, curling around the corners, creeping along the floor. I pressed my back against the control panel, gripping it like a lifeline. My eyes darted around, trying to pierce the darkness. The generator sputtered, lights flickering, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw the same pale shape move again, closer this time. I swallowed hard, telling myself I was overreacting. I was a deputy. I had dealt with drunks, fights, accidents, even death. But this wasn't like anything I'd faced before. This was waiting, watching, and I had no idea what it wanted. I checked the panel again, running my hands over switches and levers. The machine was old, temperamental, but it was holding. The flickering lights above the morgue down the hall confirmed it. Power was intermittent, stuttering, but it was there. I sighed in relief, pressing my palm to the wall. The concrete was cold, unyielding, grounding me somehow, but the unease didn't leave. Shadows shifted with every flicker of the generator's lights, stretching long and thin, leaning toward me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't empty. Then the whispers returned closer, clearer this time, almost intelligible. My name, maybe, or something like it. Turi, my stomach twisted. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly, and for a second, I thought I saw a figure crouched behind the generator, pale, watching, unmoving. The beam caught the shape for only a heartbeat before it vanished again. My pulse jumped. My hands trembled. I took a deep breath, trying to focus on the generator, to remind myself why I was here. The morgue couldn't go dark. People were counting on this. But every time I leaned over the panel, the shadows seemed to shift closer. The humming machine became louder in my ears, then quieter, stuttering, almost like it was breathing. My mind played tricks. Images of pale faces and twisted hands pressing out of the darkness. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it. I had been in law enforcement long enough to know fear, when it's real and when it's imagination. Tonight, it felt like both. Another flicker. The generator coughed, and the lights above the morgue blinked out entirely. My stomach dropped. Total darkness. I could feel my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I fumbled for flashlight, finally catching the beam, but the shadows seemed thicker now, almost solid, pressing in around the edges. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate, dragging across the concrete floor. A scraping, wet metallic, like nails against steel. I froze. My flashlight beam caught the edge of the generator, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a hand pale, reaching from beneath it, long fingers curling toward me. I jerked back, tripping over a coil of wire, heart hammering, and the hand was gone. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. My mouth went dry. I tried to rationalize it. Equipment failure, shadows, fatigued. But the scraping returned, closer, circling, weaving in a way that made no sense. I wanted to run, but I knew the doors were heavy, the hallways long, and the building too dark for me to navigate safely. I had to stay. I had to watch the generator. The hum faltered again, then sputtered back to life. The lights above the morgue flickered weakly, illuminating the room in short, harsh bursts. I scanned the shadows, flashlight shaking. Nothing, and yet I knew it was there, watching, waiting. Something was in this room, in the generator, in the dark itself. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. My radio crackled once, weakly, static, then a voice, faint, distorted, not dispatch. My name or my imagination? Uri. It lingered in the static, stretched and warped. My stomach turned. I pressed the button frantically. Dispatch. This is Deputy. Are you receiving? Over. Static answered. My own breathing sounded loud, ragged, and for a moment I thought I heard something move behind me. I spun, flashlight beam cutting the room. Nothing, only shadows, stretching long and thin across the walls, dancing with the flickering lights. I forced myself to check the generator again. All the gauges read normal, all the dials steady, but the hum continued to stutter, a heartbeat that didn't belong to a machine. My pulse mirrored it, rapid and uneven. I gripped the edges of the panel, knuckles white. The air smelled of oil, metal, and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten. Then the scraping stopped. Silence. Complete, heavy, suffocating silence. My ears ached. I forced myself to exhale. Nothing moved. My flashlight beam swept across the room. Still nothing. The generator purred steadily, oblivious. And yet, I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. Something lingered in the corners, pressing at the edges of my vision. in the shadows, in the hum itself. I sank to the floor, back against the cold concrete, hands shaking, flashlight beam steady but weak. I tried to rationalize everything. Fatigue, stress, the old building settling. But deep down I knew better. The shadows weren't just shadows. The scraping wasn't just settling metal. The whispers weren't just the wind. Something was here, and it had been waiting for the blackout, waiting for me. I stared at the generator, praying it would stay on. The morgue depended on it. People depended on it. And yet, every flicker of the lights above reminded me how fragile everything was. How fragile I was. I wasn't supposed to be alone. I wasn't supposed to be facing this. But here I was, and whatever it was patient, watching, waiting. I gripped the radio once more. Dispatch! Backup! Please! Now! Static. Nothing but static. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my trembling hands. The shadows pressed closer, the hum of the generator faltering again. I knew this night wasn't going to end quietly, and I knew that when it did, if it ever did, I wouldn't be the same. The generator sputtered, flickered, and hummed. I watched, I waited, I prayed, and I realized I had no choice. This was my watch now. The night belonged to the darkness, and I was stuck in it. I shouldn't have gone near it. Not drawer 6. Not after everything I had already seen in this blackout. But curiosity. It's a dangerous thing when you're alone in a place like this. The morgue smelled worse tonight than usual, the cold biting through my jacket and sinking into my bones. The hum of the generator was steady now, but that didn't make me feel safe. Not with the shadows stretching across the floor and the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I walked past the rows of cold drawers, each one a rectangle of metal that held a story, a life, a death. The tags told me everything, or at least they were supposed to. I ran my gloved fingers over the cool steel, checking each drawer as I went. Nothing unusual. Each tag was intact, each drawer shut tight. But then I stopped at drawer 6. It was open, just a crack, enough to see darkness inside, the black mouth of a cold tomb for the dead. I hadn't opened it. My hand hadn't brushed against it. And yet, there was, slightly ajar, my pulse hammered in my chest. My stomach twisted. I took a step closer, and the fluorescent light flickered. Shadows dancing over the metal like fingers tried to drag something out. I leaned closer, peering inside. The tag on the body was missing. Nothing indicated who it was. Just a pale, motionless form wrapped in a shroud of white. My stomach dropped. The records I had checked this afternoon had all the names in order. Drawer 6 had a tag before. Now it was gone, and the hum of the generator seemed to falter, leaving a vacuum of sound, broken only by the soft scrape of metal against metal. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. Maybe it had fallen off. Maybe it had been misplaced during the last inspection. I tried to rationalize it, but the air felt heavier now, pressing against my lungs, filling my nose with that sickly metallic scent of something long dead, something rotten. I grabbed the edge of the drawer, fingers cold, numb. The metal was slippery. The drawer resisted at first, then slid open with a groan. The body inside lay motionless, pale and unnerving in its stillness. But the tag was gone. I scanned the room, flashlight sweeping over the other drawers. All were closed. All other tags were in place. And the cameras, if I checked the feed, maybe I could see something. I moved toward the security monitor. The screen flickered, then hissed with static. I pressed a button to cycle through the cameras. The hallway, empty. The generator room, empty. The morgue itself, empty. And then the feed went dark for a heartbeat, then back, and something was wrong. The angles were off. Drawer 6 looked empty now, closed, tag in place. Not the same as before. My stomach lurched. I pressed the button again. The feed skipped. The drawer looked open. No tag. Then closed. Tag replaced. My pulse raced. My hands trembled on the controls. The lights flickered. Shadows moving at the edges of the screen. I leaned in, trying to focus, but the monitor buzzed with static, voices faint under the interference, garbled and warped. I could have sworn someone whispered my name. Deputy? I jerked back, heart hammering, scanning the morgue itself. Nothing. Just rows of drawers, pale shapes under the cold lights. Everything in its place, or so it seemed. But I knew better. I had seen it. Drawer 6 had opened on its own. The tag had vanished. And the cameras were lying. Or worse, they were showing me something else entirely. I tried to breathe, tried to calm myself. I told myself I was tired. The blackout, the generator, the shadows, they were playing tricks. But I had been in law enforcement long enough to know fear when it's real. This wasn't fear. This was watching, waiting, and it knew I had noticed. I stepped closer to the drawer again. The metal was icy, slick against my gloves. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I considered closing it, leaving it alone, ignoring it, but I couldn't. Some part of me needed to know. I pulled the drawer slowly. The motion was smooth, almost too smooth, like it had been anticipating me. Inside, the body lay exactly as before. Pale, motionless, blank eyes staring into nowhere. The tag was gone. The cold of the morgue seeped into my chest, pressing on my ribs. I leaned closer, staring, straining my eyes in the weak beam of my flashlight. And then I saw it, a faint movement under the sheet, a twitch, almost imperceptible. My pulse jumped. I forced myself to breathe slowly, telling myself it was nothing. Dead bodies don't move. But something had moved. I yanked back, heart hammering, fumbling for the monitor. The camera feed was glitching again, skipping frames, angles warped, the image of drawer 6 bending in ways it shouldn't. The tag was there, then gone, then back, then gone again. Each flicker of the screen made my stomach twist. I pressed the button again, switching cameras, hoping for clarity. Nothing, only static and distorted shadows. I tried the radio. Dispatch. Anyone, do you copy? Static. Nothing but static. My chest tightened. I knew I was alone. And the morgue, the drawer, the shadows, they knew it too. I took a shaky step back, scanning the rows of drawers with a flashlight. The hum of the generator faltered, stuttering, like a heartbeat skipped. The air grew heavier. The metallic scent of death intensified, clinging to my lungs. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, movement, a shadow slipping along the far wall. Too fast to be human, curling around the corners, vanishing as soon as I tried to focus. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my hands. The monitors, the generator, the drawers, they were all part of it, part of something I couldn't name, something that existed just beyond reason. Drawer 6 had opened. The tag had vanished. And whatever had done it was still here, still watching, still waiting. I tried to remember training, protocols, the rules we were supposed to follow. Document everything, stay calm, call for backup. But my mind kept returning to that movement, that missing tag, the flickering cameras. I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't ignore it. And every instinct screamed that I was not alone. I moved toward the drawer again, flashlight shaking. The metal was slick, cold against my gloves. The body inside was still, perfectly still, or so I thought. I leaned closer, shining the light along the shrouded form. My eyes caught the faintest shimmer, a twitch of cloth, like something had shifted beneath it. My stomach twisted violently. I stumbled back, hand flying to the radio again. Dispatch. Backup. I need. Static. Only static. My own voice returned, distorted, echoed in the receiver. Backup. Backup, deputy. The sound was warped, stretched, almost mocking. My pulse surged. My chest burned. I was trapped in a room that should have been safe. The lights flickered again, and for a heartbeat, I saw the sheet lift slightly. Not enough to reveal anything. Not enough to see a face. But enough to make my stomach plummet. Drawer 6 had done this. Something inside it, or something that controlled it, had done this. I pressed back against the wall, shaking, flashlight trembling. The generator sputtered, the hum faltering, lights flickering weakly across the room. My eyes darted over the rows of drawers. Everything else was quiet, still, closed. except drawer 6, except the tag that wasn't there. And I knew, deep down, that whatever was responsible wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I sank to the floor, heart hammering, hands trembling, flashlight beam wavering across the cold metal. The monitors buzzed, static, flickers of movement, impossible angles, whispers carried in the interference. I pressed the radio one last time. Dispatch. Please. I'm... Silence. The morgue hummed, generator sputtering, shadows leaning closer at the edges of my vision. Drawer 6 sat open, pale metal slick with cold, its contents hidden beneath the white shroud. The tag was gone, and I knew, with a sick certainty, that the drawer hadn't opened itself by accident. I had been watched. I had been tested. And whatever it was patient, waiting. And I was trapped. The tapping started almost as soon as I thought I was alone. At first, I told myself it was just the old building settling, the way the pipes hum and the metal groans in the cold. But then came the moans, low, distant, echoing from below. My stomach twisted. I hadn't checked the lower levels of the jail yet, not all of them. I had been assigned to the main floor, the morgue, the generator room. But something about this noise drew me toward the old stairwell in the corner, the one that led down into darkness I wasn't supposed to touch. The air in the stairwell was colder than the rest of the building, sharp against my lungs. I gripped the metal railing, my knuckles white, and descended slowly. The steps creaked under my boots, each one protesting, and I could feel the vibrations of the tapping echoing to the concrete walls. Every so often, the moans joined the rhythm, stretching and warping with the distance, rising and falling like something breathing underground. I reached the bottom and found a hallway I hadn't seen on any of the blueprints. The walls were bare concrete, unpainted and damp, and the air smelled like rust and wet earth. My flashlight cut a path through the darkness, revealing rows of doors, none marked. I tried the first one. Locked. The second. Locked. The tapping grew louder, closer, and now I could hear it echoing along the steel beams above my head. Something was moving. Something alive. Or at least it had been alive once. My pulse jumped. I thought about calling dispatch, but the radio had been dead for hours. Static the only answer I ever got. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight tighter, the beam trembling with every breath I took. The moans rose again, a chorus of low, mournful voices, distorted and warped, coming from the far end of the hallway. I walked forward, careful with each step, scanning the walls, the ceiling, the doors. The shadows seemed to cling to the edges of my light, twisting and crawling like they had their own intentions. I reached a door that wasn't locked. The metal handle was cold, slick with condensation. I hesitated, hand hovering over it, and that's when I felt it, the faint vibration under my boots, the rhythm of metal tapping against metal, a heartbeat of its own. I opened the door slowly. The room was vast, bigger than it should have been, with steel beams crisscrossing the ceiling like a cage. And then I saw it, a stairwell leading down further, into darkness, so complete it swallowed the flashlight beam instantly. The tapping came from there, steady now, deliberate, like fingers drumming on steel plates. The moans followed, rising in pitch, almost pleading, almost screaming. My stomach twisted violently. I should have turned back. I should have left. But some part of me, the part that had survived years on the job by curiosity and stubbornness, forced me forward. I descended the stairs, metal steps slick and cold under my boots. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of rust and decay. Shadows moved along the walls, long and thin, dancing just at the edge of the light. My breath came fast. I tried to remind myself that this was just an old basement, a forgotten part of the building, maybe a maintenance level sealed off years ago. But it didn't feel that way, not even a little. At the bottom, I found another hallway, this one narrower, walls lined with steel panels. The tapping followed me, louder now, echoing through the corridor. I pressed my back against the wall, shining the flashlight ahead. The moans had grown closer, coming from multiple directions, surrounding me, whispering through the gaps in the steel walls. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to run, but the hall seemed to stretch endlessly. I tried to call out. Hello? Anyone there? My voice bounced back, warped, distorted, almost another voice repeating it in mockery. The tapping shifted, coming from the wall to my left. I swung the flashlight. Nothing, just a steel, cold and unyielding. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was beneath the surface, metallic and deliberate, like something alive scraping against the panels. My stomach lurched violently. I stumbled back, flashlight beam swinging wildly, and caught a glimpse of something moving in the corner of my eye, pale, elongated, slipping between the shadows. I blinked. It vanished. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to climb back up, to escape. But I couldn't. The tapping called to me, insistent, patient, like a warning and a lure all at once. I pressed forward again, every step making my stomach twist, every breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to close in, steel pressing against my shoulders, shadows stretching longer, thinner. The moans followed, now louder, more coherent, almost human, calling my name, whispering, pleading. I reached a junction. 2 hallways stretched before me, one to the left, one to the right. The tapping was louder to the left, the moans to the right. My hands shook violently. I wanted to run down one, but I couldn't choose. I felt trapped, like the building itself was alive, twisting around me, guiding me towards something I didn't want to find. I chose left. The tapping grew sharper, deliberate, metallic. I followed it, every step careful, heart hammering. The walls here were thicker, steel plates bolted together, seams glowing faintly with condensation. Shadows moved along the panels, twisting and stretching with every flicker of my flashlight. The moans followed from behind, echoing, never quite in sync with the tapping, never quiet. I reached another door, rusted at the edges, handle slick. I opened it. Inside was a chamber unlike any other. Steel beams ran across the ceiling in a lattice, old machinery long abandoned, pipes crisscrossed the walls, dripping water into puddles on the floor. And there it was, the source of the tapping. A platform of steel raised slightly from the ground, with plates that resonated under contact. The tapping came from above them, rhythmic, deliberate, like something was walking in impossible steps. I stepped closer. My boots echoed on the floor, but the tapping didn't stop. It matched me, synchronized, as if aware of my presence. My stomach turned. I leaned over, shining the flashlight across the plates. Nothing, just steel, just shadows, just a faint reflection of my own face in the polished metal. Then came a sound that made me freeze. A moan, clear this time, human but wrong, stretched, warped, as if the sound had been pulled through water and metal. It came from beneath the plates. My pulse raced. My hands trembled. I wanted to step back, wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Something moved beneath the floor, faint ripples along the steel, like water displaced, like something alive, something patient, shifting just beneath the surface. I tried to remember protocols, anything that would ground me, document everything, stay calm, radio for backup. But the radio was dead, static, the only response. I pressed it anyway. Dispatch! Please! I need. Static swallowed my words. My voice echoed back through the silence of the hall, distorted. Need, deputy. The moans rose suddenly, closer, now surrounding me. The shadows twisted, flickered, reaching just beyond the light. My stomach rolled violently. I stumbled back, hand catching a steel beam. The tapping shifted, running along the plates like fingers, testing, scratching, feeling. My pulse jumped. My chest burned. I felt trapped, caught between the moans and the tapping, between shadows and steel, unable to move, unable to escape. I pressed myself against the wall, flashlight beam shaking, trying to focus. The air was thick with the smell of rust, wet metal, and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten. The moans became words, just barely, stretched, warped. Deputy, come. See, I swallowed hard, voice trembling. Who's there? Nothing answered but my own reflection in the steel plates, distorted and pale. I tried to step forward again, drawn by the tapping, by the whispers, by something I couldn't name. Each step made the steel vibrate, The moans shift, the shadows lean closer. My flashlight flickered violently. For a second, I thought I saw a pale hand emerge from beneath the floor, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. My chest tightened, my stomach lurched. I wanted to run, but the hallway stretched endlessly, the junction I had come from gone, swallowed by shadows. The tapping slowed, deliberate now, measured, waiting. The moans layered over it, voices distorted, pleading, commanding, mocking. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to breathe, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. The steel beneath my boots hummed faintly, alive, aware, listening. And then silence, complete silence. The moan stopped, the tapping ceased. Shadows pressed in, thick and still. I shivered violently, every nerve of my body screaming. My flashlight beam swept across the floor and the walls. The platform of steel was empty. No movement, no sound, only the cold, damp concrete and the lattice of steel beams above. But I knew it hadn't left. I knew whatever lived beneath the steel, whatever had made the tapping, whatever had moaned and whispered my name, was still here, patient, waiting, watching. And I had no idea how deep this basement went, no idea what secrets were hidden beneath the steel, in the darkness below the darkness. I sank to the floor, pressed against the wall, flashlight beam trembling. The generator above hummed faintly through the layers of concrete. Too far to reach me. The air smelled of rust and wet metal and fear. I tried the radio again. Static. My own voice echoed back, warped and hollow. Deputy waiting below. I realized then that I was completely alone. Alone in a way that means nothing and no one can reach you. Alone in a place that shouldn't exist. At a level the blueprints didn't show. Listening to steel whisper beneath my boots. And I knew, deep down, that whatever was down here, it had been waiting a long time. And I was exactly where it wanted me. I froze the moment I saw it. The corpse, sitting upright, not in the drawer, not sprawled or slumped against the cold steel of the morgue table. Sitting, its back was straight, like it had just woken from a long, unnatural sleep. Pale, almost gray, the skin stretched tightly over its bones. The room smelled sharper than ever, metallic, sweet, decayed, and my stomach lurched violently. I told myself I was hallucinating. I had to be. Long hours, blackout, fatigue, too much stress. But even as I whispered that to myself, even as I tried to convince my trembling hands to stop gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, I saw it move. The mouth twitched. I swallowed hard. My pulse hammered in my ears. It wasn't talking yet. Not really. Just a faint, repetitive motion, like it was struggling, testing words it couldn't form. My throat went dry, my hand shaking. The beam of my flashlight wavered across the room, catching the pale face. Hollow eyes stared at me, empty yet aware, waiting. Who's there? My voice barely carried across the morgue. Weak, shaking, I heard it answer me. Not a voice from the corpse. Not yet, but from somewhere in the dark, beyond the drawers, beyond the generator, beyond where the light could reach. My own voice, my words, my exact tone, repeated, warped, echoing back at me like a cruel mirror. Who's there? My knees buckled. I fell back against the cold tile floor, breath catching, chest tight. My flashlight beam trembled as I raised it again, swinging it across the room. The corpse hadn't moved, except the mouth twitching, more insistent now, almost impatient. And my voice, warped, repeated itself again from the shadows. I wanted to run, to escape, but my boots felt glued to the floor. The hum of the generator faltered and sputtered, flickering the morgue lights. Shadows stretched and twitched, curling along the walls, bending toward me alive. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. Every rational thought shattered under the weight of impossibility before me. I pressed back against the nearest cold drawer, gripping the edge, trying to steady my shaking hands. Dispatch! Backup! I need help. My voice cracked. Static answered me. Only static. And then, again, my voice, distorted and distant, echoed back. I need help. I gasped, the words catching my throat. The corpse's mouth twitched faster now, jaw moving in ways that shouldn't be possible. It opened slightly, teeth chattering against dry, pale gums. I leaned forward, eyes wide, straining to catch any sound. A rasp, a whisper, almost intelligible, almost a word, something. I backed up slowly, my mind racing. I tried to reason. Dead people don't sit up. Dead people don't mimic voices. Dead people don't wait, aware, patient, testing. And yet, here it was, sitting, waiting, mimicking. And the dark answered me in my own words. Every time I tried to speak, every time I tried to command the room. I stumbled over a drawer handle, flashlight swinging wildly, and the shadows danced across the ceiling. My breathing came fast, shallow, sharp. My pulse raced. I pressed myself against a wall, wishing desperately for anything, light, warmth, backup, that could break the tension, that could make this real world feel real again. The corpse's mouth moved more deliberately now, forming shapes, stretching the skin unnaturally. I heard it faintly, a rasping, wet whisper, not my voice, not yet fully human. Deputy? My stomach sank. My voice trembled as I answered without thinking. Yes? Who are you? And then it repeated me. My exact words, warped, hollow, dripping with something else entirely. The shadows shifted closer with every syllable, curling along the drawers, the ceiling, the floor. The hum of the generator sputtered, low and uneven, matching the rhythm of my heart. I couldn't tell if the corpse was speaking at all, or if the building itself, the morgue itself, had learned my voice. Every twitch of its mouth synchronized with a distorted echo from the dark, a cruel mimicry that tightened the knot in my chest. My knees shook, my boots scraped against the tile as I tried to back away. The hum of the generator faltered again, lights flickering weakly, casting long, twitching shadows. I forced myself to stand. I had to. I had to see it fully, confront it. My flashlight cut across the floor, across the drawers, and landed on the corpse. It was leaning slightly forward now, head tilting in a way that should have been impossible, eyes still locked on mine. Its mouth moved faster, twitching in silent words I couldn't understand, yet my stomach knew the intent. It wanted me to speak, to answer, to acknowledge it. I swallowed hard, hands trembling violently, and whispered, barely audible, "What do you want?" My voice echoed back again, warped, but not exact this time. "What do you want?" The syllables stretched, dripping into the darkness, almost taunting me. My stomach lurched violently. I felt like I was being watched from every angle, every shadow bending toward me, every corner pressing closer. I stumbled backward, chest tight, heart hammering. My flashlight beam caught the drawers. Some of them shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like metal on metal, responding to my panic. The corpse remained upright, mouth twitching, silent and patient, waiting for something I wasn't sure I could give. I pressed myself against the wall, fighting to breathe. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave, to escape this impossible room, but my feet wouldn't obey. My hands clutched the edge of the nearest drawer, knuckles white. My flashlight flickered again, and for a heartbeat, I thought the corpse smiled. Not fully, not humanly, but a stretching of the lips, a distortion that made my stomach twist violently. And then the echo came again, louder, closer, filling the room with my own voice. I'm here." I swallowed hard. I couldn't stop myself. The words tumbled out again, involuntarily. "What do you want from me?" The dark answered immediately, warped and cruel. "From you?" A cold sweat broke across my forehead. The lights flickered. The shadows stretched unnaturally along the ceiling and floor, pressing closer, writhing almost alive. The corpse's mouth twitched faster, the lips pulling in impossible angles, teeth chattering faintly, almost forming words I couldn't hear but felt deep in my chest. My pulse raced. My hands trembled. I took a step back, and the room seemed to stretch with me, the walls bending, the shadows following. The dark answered me in my own tone. The hum of the generator faltered, sputtered, became uneven, like it was straining, alive, conscious. My chest burned. My stomach twisted. I felt trapped, pressed between the corpse and the shadows, between the echo of my own voice and the impossible presence in the room. I fell to my knees, flashlight shaking, tears forming in the corners of my eyes. The corpse leaned slightly forward, mouth twitching, waiting. My voice trembled as I whispered again, "Please stop." The dark answered instantly with my own trembling tone, "Stop," and then silence. Complete, heavy, suffocating silence. The shadows froze. The hum of the generator stuttered and then steadied, weak but steady. The corpse sat upright, perfectly still now, like a statue, mouth twitching faintly in the dim light. My own heartbeat roared in my ears, pulse racing, hands trembling violently. I realized then that the room hadn't changed. The corpse hadn't moved, and yet everything had. The morgue, the drawers, the generator, the shadows. They had all been aware. They had all listened. And my voice, my own voice, had betrayed me, repeated me back, distorted, mocking, patient. I pressed my back against the nearest drawer, breathing heavily, shaking violently. My flashlight flickered weakly, beam trembling across the pale corpse. My mouth felt dry. My hands ached. I knew then that whatever was in this morgue, whatever had learned to mimic me, had been waiting, and it wasn't done yet. I sank to the floor, heart hammering, flashlight weak in my hands. The corpse remained upright, mouth twitching faintly. The generator hummed, sputtered, hummed again. Shadows pressed against the corners of the room. And somewhere in the darkness, my voice, warped, hollow, cruel, waited to answer back again. I had no idea how long I sat there. Minutes, hours. Time didn't exist. Only the twitching corpse, the flickering lights, the shadows, and my own echo answering me. And deep in my chest, I knew the morgue had more to show me, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't supposed to be on call that night. The sheriff had gone home early, leaving me alone in the office with the buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of old coffee. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start imagining things that aren't there. I was filing reports, staring at the faint outline of a handprint someone had left on the window months ago, when the phone rang. The first call came from a woman I didn't recognize. Her voice was small, trembling, almost apologetic. She said it was coming from Lot 19, the old McAllister plot, abandoned for decades. She said she'd heard singing. At first, I thought she meant a child, or maybe a drunk man wandering the cemetery. But there was a strange hesitation in her voice, like she wasn't sure she wanted me to believe her. She hung up before I could ask more. Then the second call came, almost immediately after. Different voice. Same story. Singing. Lot 19. The words felt heavy when she said them, like she was carrying the sound herself. My stomach sank. By the third call, I stopped trying to convince myself it was pranksters or a trick of the wind nonsense. 3 calls in 30 minutes about singing from a deserted cemetery plot didn't happen. I grabbed my jacket and keys, feeling the cold rush through the thin layers of fabric. The night was still outside the window, thick and quiet, the kind that makes every shadow feel like it's breathing. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a fox, maybe an owl, maybe someone with a harmonica. My mind kept searching for rational explanations and failing. The drive to the cemetery was longer than it should have been. The road curves in ways that make the headlights struggle, cutting swaths of darkness that seemed to swallow everything else. I kept checking the rear view mirror, half expecting headlights that weren't there, or a figure sitting in the back seat that I hadn't seen before. But nothing followed me. At least, nothing I could see. Lot 19 was at the far end, past the cracked asphalt path, past the leaning gate with the peeling paint. The cemetery itself felt different at night. The graves didn't look like markers or stones anymore. They looked like jagged teeth, gray and sharp, scraping the black sky. My boots crunched the gravel as I walked, and I kept telling myself to breathe, to stay calm. Then I heard it, a soft melodic humming. Not loud, but clear, almost sweet in a way that made my chest tighten. I froze, my hand on the butt of my flashlight, my mind racing through every possible explanation. No wind could make that sound. No owl, no fox, nothing. And it wasn't random. It had rhythm, intent. I moved closer, my footsteps careful, trying to stay behind the shadows of the bigger monuments. The humming stopped when I paused. My throat went dry. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, louder than the sound itself. Then it started again, softer this time, almost coaxing me forward. I reached Lot 19, the McAllister plot, rusted wrought iron fence, bent at strange angles, tombstones leaning like they were whispering to each other. The grass had grown thick and wild, and a rotten smell lingered, like wet leaves that had been rotting for years. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching nothing. No person, no figure, just the empty stones and the wind teasing the branches of the trees. And yet, the singing didn't stop. I stepped inside the plot, trying to make sense of it. My hand shook as I raised the flashlight, scanning each stone. Some of the names were so worn they were unreadable. Some had dates that ended decades ago. And in the center, a larger tombstone, cracked and leaning. The humming came from there, low and soft, rising and falling like someone breathing. I called out, "Hello? Sheriff's office, this is Deputy." My voice faltered. There was no reply, but the sound shifted. It was no longer humming. Now it was words, soft and broken, a lullaby I didn't recognize. The cadence was wrong, off in ways that made my skin crawl. I shined the flashlight directly at the largest tombstone. Nothing, but the temperature dropped suddenly, like the air had been drained of heat. My breath fogged in front of me. I wanted to step back, but my legs refused. My brain screamed at me to leave, to run. My hand gripped the flashlight, so hard my knuckles hurt. Then I saw it, not a figure, not exactly. A movement, a shadow slipping along the cracked stone, but not with the rhythm of someone walking. More like pooling, like darkness itself was gathering in a corner, shaping into something just beyond the edge of vision. The singing paused, then started again, louder this time, insistent, pressing into my chest. I blinked. The shadow seemed to react, stretching and retreating with my movements. I could feel it watching me, learning me, bending the night around itself. My mind raced. This isn't real. You're imagining it. But my body refused to believe my mind. Every instinct screamed danger, primal and old. I tried to move backward, but the ground shifted beneath me, as if the earth itself had softened and swallowed my boots slightly. The singing rose, not in volume, but in intensity. It filled my head, whispering things I couldn't understand, words that felt like promises and threats all at once. My knees were shaking, and I knew I should run, but the pull of it, of the sound of the darkness, was magnetic. I managed to step back, then another. The shadows between the stones seemed to ripple, like water caught in a breeze. I kept my flashlight trained on the largest tombstone. Then I saw it, faintly, almost invisible. The edge of a handprint on the stone blackened, as though the shadow itself had pressed against it. And beneath it, something carved recently, not decades, old like the rest of the stones. Letters I didn't recognize. Symbols that made no sense but felt urgent. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Startled, I yanked it out. Caller ID. The sheriff. My fingers trembled. I swiped to answer. Deputy? His voice was tense. Are you at... I didn't finish. The singing stopped instantly the moment I spoke. Silence. So complete, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The chill stayed, wrapping around my bones like a wet blanket. Yeah, I said, voice trembling. I'm at Lot 19. There's something here. Stay calm, he said, but I could hear the hesitation, the distance. Even he didn't want to say the word. I'm on my way. Don't touch anything. Just stay on the path. I swallowed hard. The silence returned after the call ended, thick and suffocating. The shadow seemed static now, but I knew better. I knew whatever it was. It hadn't gone. It was watching, waiting. The smallest crack of the stone under my boot sounded like a gunshot in the night. My hands shook, my legs weak. I had never been alone like this. Not really. Not with something that felt alive, and yet not. I stayed by the edge of the plot. Flashlight pointed at the central tombstone, listening. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the dead leaves. For a brief second, I thought I heard laughter. Or was it singing? Too light, too soft. It disappeared before I could place it. And then I realized I wasn't sure I wanted to. I realized that my mind was already bending, filling the silence with shapes, sounds, stories. That's the danger. That's what the night wants. It doesn't kill you outright. It makes you see, makes you hear, makes you remember things you never lived, things you shouldn't know. By the time the sheriff arrived, the singing had stopped completely. The night seemed normal. The shadows returned to their places, unmoving. The air warmed slightly, almost forgivingly. But I knew it was still here, somewhere, watching, waiting. And next time it would be louder, more demanding. I followed the sheriff to the car, but I kept looking back, unable to resist it. Lot 19 waited, silent again, empty to anyone else who didn't know the sound. But I would never forget it. That melody, that darkness, that feeling of something just beyond the world, patient and eternal, calling my name. And when I finally got back to the office, sitting under those flickering fluorescent lights, I realized something worse than fear, something that would follow me home. I couldn't stop hearing it. I didn't sleep that night. Even with the office empty, with the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the silence was too loud. Every shadow in the corner of the room seemed to lean closer, waiting for me to notice. I kept thinking about Lot 19, about that singing, the shadow moving against the tombstone. My hand shook every time I poured a fresh cup of coffee. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I had to understand what I'd seen. By morning, I was already at my desk, rifling through the old files the sheriff kept in the back room. Paper stacked on paper, brittle and yellow with age, musty with dust and memories. I pulled out the folder labeled Cemetery Records G. The handwriting was jagged, old-fashioned, like someone had carved the letters with a knife instead of a pen. It didn't take long to find Lot 19. A typed sheet, edges fraying, listed names, dates, and plot numbers. And there was Greeley, several Greeleys, all listed in that same plot. My fingers traced the lines of the paper as if touching them might bring the dead into focus, like I could feel their presence through the ink. I pulled another folder, a series of photographs that had been taken decades ago. Black and white, corners curled, faces staring back at me from beyond the grave. Adults, children, even babies swaddled in fragile blankets, their eyes too dark to tell what they were thinking. I noticed the dates. All of them were from the same year, the year of the flood, 1954. I set the photos on my desk, aligning them carefully. There was something off about them, the eyes mostly. They seemed to follow me, not in a photograph way, but in a living way. One boy, maybe 8 years old, with a crooked smile and a wide-brimmed hat, stared at me so hard it felt like he was breathing through the paper. The files told a story, dry and bureaucratic, but horrifying once I pieced it together. The Greeley family had been living downstream when the flood hit. The river had risen overnight, a monstrous wall of water, swallowing homes and belongings without warning. Entire streets were washed away. Bodies were found days later, but not all of them. Some were never recovered. The local paper at the time called it tragedy. But the records hinted at something worse. There had been no proper burial for most of them, just quick graves, temporary markers, wooden crosses rotting in the mud. Lot 19. That wasn't just a plot. It was their final resting place. Or maybe a resting place that never got the chance to rest. My stomach churned as I realized the singing might not have been random. It might have been them, or whatever remained of them, trying to be noticed, trying to be remembered. I picked up another photo. A woman, mid-30s, hair pulled tight back, eyes hollow. She wasn't smiling, not really, but there was a softness to her expression that made it worse somehow. It made me imagine her in the water, her dress clinging to her body, her arms reaching for something solid and safe. I felt my throat tighten, and I had to put the photo down. The deeper I went into files, the more stories emerged. A list of names scrawled in pencil along the margins, probably added later. Witnesses, Neighbors who had survived the flood. Some had moved away. Some had left notes about seeing figures along the riverbanks, singing at night, disappearing before anyone could reach them. At the time, it had been dismissed as grief, hysteria, or imagination. Now I wasn't so sure. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The office was quiet except for the hum of the lights. The smell of old paper and coffee mixed in my nose. I could feel a weight settling across my shoulders, the kind of weight that presses you down without making a sound. I realized I hadn't blinked in a long time, staring at the photographs, staring at the names. Then I found the file that made me pause, that made my hands tremble so badly I had to set it down immediately. It was a small envelope marked Lot 19 Investigation Notes. Inside were photographs taken after the flood. Some of the graves, barely more than piles of dirt, wooden crosses splitting and leaning. Some of the bodies had been partially uncovered, washed away, tangled in debris. The photographs were so stark, so raw. It felt like looking through a window into another world, one that hadn't forgiven the living. And then I saw something else. On one of the tombstones in the photo, a small scratch. At first, I thought it was damage from the weather, but the shape, it was a handprint, blackened, pressed into the stone, just like the one I had seen the night before. My heart raced. How could it be? That photo was from decades ago, long before I ever stepped foot in that cemetery. I ran my fingers over the edge of the envelope. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been left in Lot 19 wasn't done, that it wasn't sleeping, that it had been waiting for someone to see, to remember. I looked through more photos. Children, adults, all with the same haunted look. Some had been half buried by mud. Some had been washed away entirely, their names scribbled in the files, marked unknown. There were letters too, faded and nearly unreadable, written by surviving family members. They spoke of voices in the night, of shadows moving across their windows, of songs that came from empty fields. Letters that sounded almost exactly like the complaints we had received. My hands shook as I set the files down. I kept thinking about the deputy who had gone out to the night of the calls, about the shadows moving along cracked stones, about the singing that rose and fell with such strange intention. I could see it now, so clearly in my mind. The Greeleys, still trying to find rest, still trying to tell someone they existed, still trying to be heard. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, trying to shake the images, but it didn't work. I could still see the boy in the photograph, still hear that soft, broken melody whispering at the edges of my mind. I felt a chill creep up my spine, even though the office was warm, the coffee in my mug steaming gently. By the time the sheriff arrived later that morning, I had barely spoken. He glanced at the files on my desk, his eyes narrowing when he saw the photos. He didn't say anything, just nodded, like he already knew. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever heard the singing himself. I wanted to ask if he remembered the flood, if he remembered the Greeleys, but the word stuck in my throat. Instead, we drove back to the cemetery. Lot 19 waited in silence, the way it always did, but this time it felt different. The air was heavier, thick with something I couldn't name. The sun was higher now, but the shadows still lingered between the stones, waiting, watching. I could feel it, a presence that didn't belong to the living, pressing against my skin. As we walked along the path, I kept thinking about the photographs, about the Greeleys who had never truly been laid to rest, about the songs that must have carried across the river, across time, calling for attention. I realized then that the complaints weren't just about sound. They were about memory, about acknowledgement, about the living finally noticing what had been forgotten. And I understood something else too. Whatever was in Lot 19, whatever had sung to me in the night, it didn't just want to be heard. It wanted someone to see, someone to remember, someone to understand the wrongs that had never been righted. I felt a deep, gnawing unease, the kind that burrows into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Because the more I learned, the more I understood that this wasn't going to end with a drive back to the office, or with the sheriff nodding and going home. This was just the beginning, and I was already part of it. I turned the files over my hands one last time before placing them back in the cabinet. The photographs stared at me from their folders, silent and patient, like they had all the time in the world. I left the office, stepping out into the daylight that somehow felt too bright, too honest. Lot 19 way behind me, quiet but alive, holding its secrets beneath cracked stones and rotting crosses. And I knew I would hear it again. The song, soft, insistent, waiting for me to remember, waiting for me to come back. The rain had started again, the kind that sinks into your clothes and chills your bones no matter how thick the jacket is. I drove past Lot 19 slowly, windshield wipers barely keeping up, water pooling along the edges of the road. Even in daylight, the cemetery looked different in rain. Darker, more hollow. Shadows clung to the cracks between the stones, moving with the wind, and I could almost feel them watching me as I passed. I didn't know why I kept going back. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was that quiet, insistent pull I'd felt since the first night. Something in Lot 19 wanted me there. And now, after reading those old files and staring at the photographs of the Greeleys, I couldn't stop thinking about them, about their voices, about what had been buried and forgotten. By the time I parked, my boots were soaked and the gravel crunched underfoot in a rhythm that seemed too loud in the rain. I stood at the edge of the plot for a long moment, looking at the wet grass and the tilted tombstones. The air smelled of mud and wet leaves. I could feel the weight of the ground beneath me, the cold pressing up through my boots. And then I heard it, a sound, faint at first, almost lost in the patter of rain. A muffled laugh. I froze. My heart jumped into my throat. I tried to convince myself it was water running through broken pipes, or maybe an animal hiding in the roots of a tree. But it wasn't random. It was a laugh, childlike, low and wet, like it was coming from somewhere beneath the soil itself. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands into the mud. My fingers sank in, the wet earth cool and soft. The laughter stopped for a moment, like it was listening, waiting. Then it came again, closer this time, as if the ground itself was speaking. I grabbed a small shovel from the back of my car, hands shaking, and began to dig. The first few inches were easy, soft mud giving way beneath the blade. But then the soil hardened, packed tight, almost resisting me. The laugh returned, muffled and urgent, under the ground, pushing through the soil. My chest tightened. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my hands kept moving, slicing through the dark, wet earth. The ground trembled slightly beneath my feet. I stumbled back, gripping the shovel. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. My heartbeat thudded painfully. I knelt again, shoving the shovel into the soil, deeper this time, and the tremor returned, stronger, shaking my arms, shaking my legs. Something was moving under there, something alive, or maybe something that shouldn't be alive at all. And then I saw it, a small wooden toy, half buried in the mud, a faded, broken doll with one eye missing, its mouth cracked. My stomach churned, a cold knot forming in my chest. I dug faster, heart hammering, and found more. A tin soldier, its paint flaking. A tiny wagon, wheels twisted and rusted. Old toys, buried for decades, now surfacing as if pushed by unseen hands. I paused, my breath coming in short gasps. The laughter returned, now more insistent, surrounding me in the damp air. I felt the ground vibrate beneath my knees, tiny shocks running up through my body. The toys shifted slightly in the mud, as if someone or something was arranging them. I thought about the photographs again, about the children in the Greeley family. I thought about their voices, their laughter, and a realization hit me, cold and sharp. These weren't just toys left behind by time. These were markers, reminders, calls for recognition, calls for someone to remember them, to see what had been buried and forgotten. I dug deeper, hands raw from the shovel, mud caking under my fingernails. The soil felt alive. Small tremors ran through it with every movement, and the laughter grew louder, more defined. I could hear fragments of words now, broken and wet, overlapping with giggles and whispers. Names. My name. The children's names. Or maybe I just thought I heard them. My mind teetered on the edge between reality and something else, something ancient and patient. And then the ground shifted suddenly, violently. My feet slipped. I stumbled backward, landing hard in the mud. The laughter erupted into a chorus, high-pitched, desperate, drowning the sound of rain. I scrambled back to my knees, hands clawing at the wet soil. Another toy surfaced, a small, broken music box. I picked it up. The metal was rusted, and when I touched it, a faint tune played, warped and slow, like the memory of a lullaby. I realized then that the ground itself was alive with memory. Each tremor, each shift, each toy that surfaced was a story, a fragment of life that had been stolen, buried in mud and silence. And the Greeleys, they were still here, waiting, singing, laughing, watching through the soil. I dug until my arms ached, until the shovel felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Old buttons, shoes, doll limbs, a small wooden chair, all broken, all half swallowed by the earth. Each discovery made the air heavier, pressing against my lungs. I wanted to stop. I wanted to run. But something wouldn't let me. Something whispered in the tremors and the giggles, telling me to keep going, to see, to remember. A handprint appeared in the mud. Not mine, not real, but pressed as if by a child's hand. Small fingers splayed, dark against the wet soil. My pulse jumped. The laughter paused. Silence, thick and suffocating. Then a whisper. Help us. The words were soft, barely more than breath, but they cut through the rain, through the mud, through my fear. My hands froze. The whisper came again, this time from everywhere, on the ground, in the air, in the echoes of the tombstones. Remember us. I stumbled backward, clutching the shovel, my eyes darting across the mud and toys. The earth trembled again, small but insistent. I could feel it pulsing beneath me like a heartbeat. Every toy I unearthed seemed to vibrate with it, like it was alive, like it was waiting for acknowledgement. I remembered the file again, the photographs, the letters. The Greeleys had never been properly buried. The flood had taken them, washed them away, and the town had moved on, leaving Lot 19 to rot. And now, decades later, they were calling for someone to notice, calling for someone to hear what had been ignored. The sky darkened further, clouds heavy with rain, and I felt my own presence shrinking under the weight of it all. The laughter rose again, closer now, circling me, wrapping around my legs, whispering in voices that were part memory, part shadow. The toys trembled in the mud, shifting closer to me as if drawn by my fear, my attention. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave, to forget, to drive back to my office and never think of Lot 19 again. But I couldn't. The soil pulsed, and the whispers tugged at my mind, tugged at my memory. I dug again, faster, frantically, uncovering a small tin whistle, half buried in mud, rusted and blackened with age. I picked it up, holding it tight, and the laughter coalesced into a sound I almost recognized. The same melody I had heard that first night, soft and broken, rising and falling, crying for recognition. I realized then with a cold, sinking certainty that the laughter, the toys, the tremors, they weren't just remnants of a family. They were a warning. They were the living memory of a wrong that had never been made right. And I was standing in the center of it, the only one left to witness, to remember, to acknowledge it. The rain poured harder. My clothes were soaked, my hands cut and raw from the shovel, mud caking under my fingernails. I looked down at the toys, at the handprints in the soil, at the tiny chairs and broken dolls, and I felt the weight of a century pressing down. The Greeleys were here, not gone, not silent, waiting for someone to see them, to recognize what had been buried and forgotten. I didn't know if I would survive the night, if my mind could hold a memory of what I had uncovered. But I knew this. Lot 19 was alive with voices, alive with laughter, alive with the things no one else remembered, and it had chosen me to listen. I sank to my knees, trembling, listening to the soil beneath my fingers, listening to the muffled laughter, the whispers, the tiny, insistent songs of children who had never been allowed to rest. And for the first time I understood, to walk away now would be to ignore them, to forget them, and some things once remembered can never be unseen. I dug on. The office was quieter than it had ever been, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and refuses to let go. I kept glancing at the police radio on my desk, the one that usually buzzed with routine calls and the static hum of the night shift. But tonight it was different. It felt alive. I had barely eaten since leaving Lot 19. My clothes still smelled of mud and rain, and my hands itched from the cold, cracked earth. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was over. That digging up toys and seeing the shadows of forgotten children was enough for one night. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I set my coffee mug down with a dull clink and leaned back in my chair. The radio hummed. At first, it was just static, the usual white noise that blends into background after hours of listening. Then, faintly, almost impossibly soft, I heard it. A melody. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was a lullaby. The same one I had heard beneath the mud at Lot 19, slowed and warped by time, echoing through the soil. But now, it was coming through the radio, faint and distorted, as if the speakers were playing something that shouldn't exist. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of my desk. The lullaby was fragmented, broken by the static, rising and falling in uneven pulses. I could almost hear the laughter layer beneath it, faint, childlike, curling into the melody in ways that felt wrong, yet impossible to ignore. I pressed a button to answer the dispatch, voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. Dispatch? This is Deputy. The reply was what I expected. No crackling, no adult voice, no routine updates. Just a child's voice, clear and chilling in its simplicity. We're still waiting. I froze, the words hanging in the room like smoke. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the desk to keep from toppling over. Who's there? I managed to croak. My throat felt raw. The lullaby swelled, the notes twisting in the static. The voice came again, calm, insistent, almost patient. Don't forget us. I pressed the radio closer, fumbling with the knobs, trying to clear the static, trying to make sense of it. The sound wavered, slipping between channels like the children were moving, shifting through the frequencies, finding me no matter where I was. Memories of Lot 19 returned, vivid and unrelenting. The mud, the toys, the handprints pressed into the wet earth, the trembling soil beneath my hands, the laughter that was never quite real, but always there. My stomach twisted. My mind whispered that I should leave, that I should run from the station, from the radio, from the pull of it all. But my body refused. I was tethered unwillingly to the sound. We're still waiting, the voice said again. This time, it felt closer, as if the word were curling around my ears, wrapping into my skull. I could feel the pulse of it, the insistence behind it. Not a threat, exactly. A demand, a longing. I dropped to my knees, clutching the radio like a lifeline. The static roared, filling the room. Then the lullaby broke through again, clearer now, painfully familiar. My hands traced over the device as if touching could anchor me, could ground me in reality. But reality was slipping. It had never felt so fragile. I thought about the Greeleys, about the flood, about Lot 19. I thought about the toys I had dug up, half buried in mud, trembling as if alive. And I understood in a gut-churning way that the lullaby wasn't just music. It wasn't a sound. It was memory, a voice trapped in time, calling through whatever remnants of technology it could find. Calling to me. I pressed the button again, trying to speak, trying to say anything. I hear you. I see you. What do you want? My voice was hoarse, almost swallowed by the static and the faint melody. A pause. Just static. Then the words, slow, deliberate. Remember? Lot 19. My heart raced. I felt every hair on my arms rise. The office felt colder, heavier, the lights flickering softly as if acknowledging the presence that had made itself known. The radio hummed. Then the melody returned, the lullaby clearer, richer, but still warped, carried by static that made it impossible to pinpoint. It filled the room in waves, crawling along the walls and floor. I sank to the floor, knees to chest, gripping the radio as if holding it closer could protect me. And then I heard it, under the lullaby, beneath the distortion, a laugh, wet, muffled, desperate, exactly like the one I had heard under the soil at Lot 19. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was imagination, that maybe I was unraveling. The long nights, the rain, the mud, the fear of what I had unearthed finally catching up. But the sound persisted. A low tremor ran through the office floorboards, subtle but real, like the earth itself was responding. I remembered the toys, the handprints, the tremors beneath my hands as I dug. And now, through the radio, the lullaby and laughter merged. A child's voice, patient and commanding, threading through the static. We're still here. My stomach turned. My hands shook. The pull of it, of memory, of grief, of something that had waited decades to be noticed, was almost unbearable. I wanted to drop the radio, to run, to forget everything. But something deeper, a part of me I didn't understand, refused. It was fascination, obligation, fear, guilt, all tangled into a single sharp knot inside my chest. The voice spoke again. Do you remember us? The question cut deeper than any scream could. I remembered Lot 19. The mud, the toys, the trembling soil, the handprints pressed into the earth. I remember the files, the photographs, the flood, the bodies left unburied. Every detail had been burned into me, and now the children, or whatever remained of them, demanded acknowledgement. I spoke, my voice barely more than a whisper, shaking raw. I remember the static pulse in response. The lullabies swelled, stretching and bending in the speakers. I could hear the faintest sound of footsteps on wet grass, a soft scuffle, as if children were moving just outside the walls of the office. And then one more voice, clear, close, and possibly intimate. Thank you for listening. The static returned to normal, the hum settling, the lullaby gone. But I didn't move. My hands still gripped the radio, knuckles white. The silence felt heavy, almost alive. I couldn't tell if it was relief or if the weight of the waiting had just shifted. I could still feel them. I knew they were still out there, in Lot 19, in the mud, in the earth, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to remember them. I sat there long after the lullaby ended, long after the rain had stopped. The office was quiet again, normal in the way the world feels after a storm. But I knew better. I knew the static could return at any moment, carrying voices, carrying memory, carrying the soft insistence of children who had never been allowed to rest. I thought about the Greeleys, about the flood, about the toys trembling in the mud, and I understood, fully and painfully, that memory could be alive, that grief could echo across decades, carried in sound, in soil, and static, that the living were not always the ones who had the power to speak. I left the office that night, hands still trembling, ears straining for any sign of the melody. The streets were empty, wet, and reflective under the dim light of the street lamps. I kept imagining the laughter behind me, or the soft cadence of the lullaby following me through the darkness. Lot 19 was waiting. It always would be. And now, so was I. Because once you hear the song, once you feel the tremor of what was buried and forgotten, it doesn't leave. You carry it with you. You remember. You answer. And I had answered. I had been at the sheriff's office for only a week, still learning the layout, still trying to remember where the files ended and the supply closets began. The senior deputies all joked about the haunted corners of the building, old stories passed down from one officer to the next. I never paid much attention. I like things rational, straightforward. Evidence rooms, paperwork, late-night calls. Nothing more. That night, though, I was alone. The senior deputies had all gone home, leaving me with a hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of old coffee and dust. I was inventorying the evidence lockers, checking tags, making notes. Everything seemed normal until I reached the far corner, a section that hadn't been touched in months. There it was, a tape recorder, sitting on a shelf like it had been waiting for me. Yellow plastic, scratched edges, a label curling from years of neglect. I bent closer. My name wasn't on it. No, this belonged to the previous sheriff. I could see it clearly on the label, Sheriff Collins, do not play at night. I froze, reading and rereading the words. Why would a sheriff leave a warning like that? Part of me wanted to scoff. Another part, The part that had grown up reading ghost stories and horror tales. Tense with curiosity. The tape recorder looked old, bulky, out of place among the modern evidence bags and folders. Dust covered it, except for a streak across the top, like someone had recently moved their hand over it. I hesitated. Rationally, I should have left it alone. Evidence rooms weren't places for curiosity, and certainly not at night. But something about the label felt urgent, almost pleading. I picked it up, cold in my hands. The tape inside clicked softly when I pressed the eject button, releasing a cassette that smelled faintly of mildew and age. The label on the cassette was simpler than the warning on the recorder. Lot 19 to 1954. My pulse quickened. I'd heard the older deputies mention Lot 19 before. The abandoned cemetery plot. The old Grilly family graves. Stories about children lost in the flood decades ago. Usually, those stories ended with a shake of the head and a warning. Don't go poking around where you don't belong. I placed the recorder on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. I told myself it was just curiosity, just history, just a story waiting to be heard. Rational, harmless. I pressed the play button. Static. The sound hissed and spat from the speakers, low and coarse. Then, beneath it, I heard a voice. Gravelly, aged, unmistakably human. Sheriff Collins. Lot 19, he said. Pause. A rustle, like paper shifting. Then, they're waiting. They hear you before you even arrive. Do not play this at night. You will understand. I swallowed hard, the hairs on my neck rising. The static crackled again, then the tape shifted, and another voice spoke. Not the sheriff's. Softer, younger, almost a whisper. Please. I froze, gripping the edges of the counter. The whisper repeated, layered beneath the static, insistent, faint but unmistakable. The tape hissed and warped, making the voice almost melodic, almost mournful. My mind raced. What had happened at Lot 19? Why would the sheriff warn someone not to play a tape at night? I leaned closer, straining to hear. The voice continued, broken and fragmented, interspersed with heavy breathing, like someone or something was just out of reach, trapped beneath layers of tape and static. Do not come alone, it said finally, voice trembling, almost inaudible. Then static swallowed it. I sat back, heart hammering. My office light flickered briefly, and I realized my hands were sweating. I told myself to breathe. Rationally, I knew this was just a recording. Maybe the sheriff had been eccentric. Maybe it was a joke, a warning to scare anyone who dared touch it. But it felt alive, like it wanted to reach through the static, through the recorder, straight into me. Curiosity battled with fear. My rational side screamed to turn it off, shove it back on the shelf, and forget I had ever seen it. My other side, the side that couldn't resist the pull of mystery, urged me to listen. I pressed pause, then play again. The tape hissed, the static rising into a low, constant drone. And then, faint beneath it, I heard it, a melody, soft, childlike, a lullaby, slow and broken, the kind of thing a child hums when alone in the dark. My stomach churned. I knew that sound. I had read about it in old files, heard whispers from senior deputies, the Greeley children lost in the flood, supposedly buried in Lot 19. And here it was, preserved in tape, echoing decades later. I leaned back, staring at the recorder, unable to move. The lullaby continued, faint, warping in and out of the static. My thoughts raced. Connecting dots I wasn't sure I wanted to connect. Sheriff Collins had left this behind, a warning. He had recorded it. He had known, and he had feared it. I pressed the stop button, hands shaking. Rationally, it was just sound. Old tape, old voices. But my mind refused to accept it. My pulse hadn't slowed, and every shadow in the office seemed heavier, watching me, waiting. Then I heard something else. Behind the recorder, beneath the static and the tape hiss, I thought I heard a laugh. Wet, soft, childlike. Almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. My blood ran cold. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation. The office was empty. I was alone. Nothing could have made that sound. I set the tape down, reaching for a flashlight in the drawer. My hands were trembling too much to hold it steady. I told myself I was imagining it, that the mind plays tricks, especially when tired, alone, and faced with mystery. But the sense of being watched lingered. Heavy, pressing, insistent. I thought of Lot 19, of the graves, of the stories, and I realized something awful. The sheriff's warning wasn't superstition. It wasn't a joke. It was fear. Pure, simple, consuming fear. I pressed play again. The tape crackled, the lullaby faint beneath the static, and the voice returned, sharper this time. "They're still waiting," the whisper said. My stomach flipped. The words weren't on the tape when I first listened. I hadn't imagined them. They were new, or I hadn't been ready to hear them. Either way, they were real. The air in the evidence room felt colder. Shadows stretched along the walls. I told myself to breathe, to be rational. But every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to forget. Yeah, I couldn't. Something about the recording anchored me, pulled me closer, demanded my attention. I reached for the eject button, ready to end it, to put the recorder back on the shelf and lock the drawer. My fingers brushed the plastic, and a shiver ran down my spine. The lullaby shifted, slowed, warped, and for a moment, I could swear I heard multiple voices humming in unison. Children, whispering, laughing, crying, mixed together in a sound that made my chest tighten, my vision blur. I dropped the tape recorder back on the counter, backing away slowly. My pulse hammered, my breath shallow. I felt it then, the pull of Lot 19, the graves, the lost voices, threading through time and static and fear. The sheriff had been right. You should never play it at night. The lights flickered again, and I realized how quiet the office had become. The only sound was my breathing, rapid and shallow, and the soft hum of the tape recorder, sitting innocently on the shelf. But I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't innocent, that the voices were still there, just out of reach, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to hear them. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at my desk, staring at the recorder, half expecting the voices to return, half expecting nothing. Morning came slow, gray, heavy with rain, and still I couldn't touch the tape. It felt like it had a weight of its own, anchored in fear and memory, and I was trapped in its pull. By the time the sheriff arrived, I had made a decision. I didn't tell him I'd found the recorder. I didn't tell anyone. I put it back in the corner, on the shelf, exactly where I found it, label facing up. Do not play at night. I walked away with a knot in my stomach and a sense that the room itself had noticed my curiosity, that it had judged me, and that it would wait. Always wait. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, beneath the ordinary sound of the office. Faint and insistent. The lullaby, the whispering, the children waiting. And I know one day, someone else will find it, and the warning will be the only thing standing between them and the voices in the dark. I had been at the sheriff's office for only a week, still learning the layout, still trying to remember where the files ended and the supply closets began. The senior deputies all joked about the haunted corners of the building, old stories passed down from one officer to the next. I never paid much attention. I like things rational, straightforward. Evidence rooms, paperwork, late night calls. Nothing more. That night, though, I was alone. The senior deputies had all gone home, leaving me with a hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of old coffee and dust. I was inventorying the evidence lockers, checking tags, making notes. Everything seemed normal until I reached the far corner, a section that hadn't been touched in months. There it was, a tape recorder, sitting on a shelf like it had been waiting for me. Yellowed plastic, scratched edges, a label curling from years of neglect. I bent closer. My name wasn't on it. No, this belonged to the previous sheriff. I could see it clearly on the label. Sheriff Collins, do not play at night. I froze, reading and rereading the words. Why would a sheriff leave a warning like that? Part of me wanted to scoff. Another part, the part that had grown up reading ghost stories and horror tales, tense with curiosity. The tape recorder looked old, bulky, out of place among the modern evidence bags and folders. Dust covered it, except for a streak across the top, like someone had recently moved their hand over it. I hesitated. Rationally, I should have left alone. Evidence rooms weren't places for curiosity, and certainly not at night. But something about the label felt urgent, almost pleading. I picked it up, cold in my hands. The tape inside clicked softly when I pressed the eject button, releasing a cassette that smelled faintly of mildew and age. The label on the cassette was simpler than the warning on the recorder. Lot 19 to 1954. My pulse quickened. I'd heard the older deputies mention Lot 19 before. The abandoned cemetery plot, the old Grilly family graves, stories about children lost in the flood decades ago. Usually, those stories ended with a shake of the head and a warning. Don't go poking around where you don't belong. I placed the recorder on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. I told myself it was just curiosity, just history, just a story waiting to be heard. Rational, harmless. I pressed the play button. Static. The sound hissed and spat from the speakers, low and coarse. Then, beneath it, I heard a voice. Gravelly, aged, unmistakably human. Sheriff Collins. Lot 19, he said. Pause. A rustle, like paper shifting. Then, they're waiting. They hear you before you even arrive. Do not play this at night. You will understand. I swallowed hard, the hairs on my neck rising. The static crackled again, then the tape shifted, and another voice spoke. Not the sheriff's. Softer, younger, almost a whisper. Please. I froze, gripping the edges of the counter. The whisper repeated, layered beneath the static, insistent, faint but unmistakable. The tape hissed and warped, making the voice almost melodic, almost mournful. My mind raced. What had happened at Lot 19? Why would the sheriff warn someone not to play a tape at night? I leaned closer, straining to hear. The voice continued, broken and fragmented, interspersed with heavy breathing, like someone or something was just out of reach, trapped beneath layers of tape and static. Do not come alone, it said finally, voice trembling, almost inaudible. Then static swallowed it. I sat back, heart hammering. My office light flickered briefly, and I realized my hands were sweating. I told myself to breathe. Rationally, I knew this was just a recording. Maybe the sheriff had been eccentric. Maybe it was a joke, a warning to scare anyone who dared touch it. But it felt alive, like it wanted to reach through the static, through the recorder, straight into me. Curiosity battled with fear. My rational side screamed to turn it off, shove it back on the shelf, and forget I had ever seen it. My other side, the side that couldn't resist the pull of mystery, urged me to listen. I pressed pause, then play again. The tape hissed, the static rising into a low, constant drone. And then, faint beneath it, I heard it. A melody. Soft, childlike. A lullaby. Slow and broken. The kind of thing a child hums when alone in the dark. My stomach churned. I knew that sound. I had read about it in old files. Heard whispers from senior deputies. The Greeley children, lost in the flood, supposedly buried in Lot 19. And here it was, preserved in tape, echoing decades later. I leaned back, staring at the recorder, unable to move. The lullaby continued, faint, warping in and out of the static. My thoughts raced, connecting dots I wasn't sure I wanted to connect. Sheriff Collins had left us behind. A warning. He had recorded it. He had known, and he had feared it. I pressed the stop button, hands shaking. Rationally, it was just sound. Old tape, old voices. But my mind refused to accept it. My pulse hadn't slowed, and every shadow in the office seemed heavier, watching me, waiting. Then I heard something else. Behind the recorder, beneath the static and the tape hiss, I thought I heard a laugh. Wet, soft, childlike. Almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. My blood ran cold. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation. The office was empty. I was alone. Nothing could have made that sound. I set the tape down, reaching for a flashlight in the drawer. My hands were trembling too much to hold it steady. I told myself I was imagining it, that the mind plays tricks, especially when tired, alone, and faced with mystery. But the sense of being watched lingered, heavy, pressing, insistent. I thought of Lot 19, of the graves, of the stories, and I realized something awful. The sheriff's warning wasn't superstition. It wasn't a joke. It was fear. Pure, simple, consuming fear. I pressed play again. The tape crackled, the lullaby faint beneath the static, and the voice returned sharper this time. "They're still waiting," the whisper said. My stomach flipped. The words weren't on the tape when I first listened. I hadn't imagined them. They were new, or I hadn't been ready to hear them. Either way, they were real. The air in the evidence room felt colder. Shadows stretched along the walls. I told myself to breathe, to be rational. But every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to forget. Yet I couldn't. Something about the recording anchored me, pulled me closer, demanded my attention. I reached for the eject button, ready to end it, to put the recorder back on the shelf and lock the drawer. My fingers brushed the plastic, and a shiver ran down my spine. The lullaby shifted, slowed, warped, and for a moment, I could swear I heard multiple voices humming in unison. Children, whispering, laughing, crying, mixed together in a sound that made my chest tighten, my vision blur. I dropped the tape recorder back on the counter, backing away slowly. My pulse hammered, my breath shallow. I felt it then, the pull of Lot 19, the graves, the lost voices, threading through time and static and fear. The sheriff had been right. You should never play it at night. The lights flickered again, and I realized how quiet the office had become. The only sound was my breathing, rapid and shallow, and the soft hum of the tape recorder, sitting innocently on the shelf. But I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't innocent, that the voices were still there, just out of reach, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to hear them. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at my desk, staring at the recorder, half expecting the voices to return, half expecting nothing. Morning came slow, gray, heavy with rain, and still I couldn't touch the tape. It felt like it had a weight of its own, anchored in fear and memory, and I was trapped in its pull. By the time the sheriff arrived, I had made a decision. I didn't tell him I'd found the recorder. I didn't tell anyone. I put it back in the corner on the shelf, exactly where I found it, label facing up. Do not play at night. I walked away with a knot in my stomach and a sense that the room itself had noticed my curiosity, that it had judged me, and that it would wait, always wait. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, beneath the ordinary sound of the office, faint and insistent, the lullaby, the whispering, the children waiting. And I know one day someone else will find it, and the warning will be the only thing standing between them and the voices in the dark. I kept the tape recorder on my desk, though every rational part of me screamed to lock it away and never touch it again. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had heard the night before. The whispers, the lullaby, the voice telling me they were waiting. Something about it felt unfinished, like the sheriff had left a warning, but not the full story. I was curious. I was terrified. And somehow I was drawn to it. By the second night, I found myself alone in the office again, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, the quiet press against my ears, making every creak of the building feel enormous, like footsteps echoing from a corridor I couldn't see. I sat down at my desk and stared at the tape recorder, the label still crisp in my memory. Do not play at night. My hands shook as I picked it up, cold from nerves, cold from the thought of what I might hear next. I pressed play. Static at first, harsh and white. Then the voice came. Sheriff Collins, calm but strained. March 12th, 2,200 hours. Call reports a man walking along Oak Street. He does not return. I froze. Oak Street. I knew Oak Street. I had driven it on my patrols countless times. But tonight was March 11th. Tomorrow night, the timestamp Collins had said. My pulse raced. My fingers hovered over the stop button, but I couldn't press it. The static shifted, and another voice rose underneath it. A whisper this time, soft, urgent. He's coming. My stomach churned. Something in me recognized the pattern immediately. Sheriff Collins had recorded events before they happened. Each entry on the tape corresponded to a call he or someone had received in the past, and the caller had never survived. The next segment of tape played, distorted at first, then clear enough to chill me. March 13th, 0145 hours. Woman reports footsteps outside her window. House is empty when deputies arrive. No witnesses. I lean forward, heart hammering, tracing the words on the cassette's label with my fingertip. Empty. No witnesses. I remembered reading old case files, corresponding reports, each ending in death, each leaving the responders puzzled and shaken. And now, through this tape, the events were being described before they occurred. The static grew louder, the whispers threading through it like fine needles. I could barely hear it, but I knew I wasn't imagining the pattern. The tape wasn't recounting history. It was predicting the future, detailing deaths before they happened. I pressed pause and rubbed my eyes. I felt dizzy, unsteady. The room seemed smaller, suddenly, the shadows stretching along the walls like fingers reaching for me. I thought about the previous night, the lullaby, the faint laughter under the mud at Lot 19. My pulse hammered in my ears. Was this connected? The tape, the dead children, the warnings, they all pointed to the same thing. Something alive in the recordings. Something waiting. I pressed play again. March 14, 0310 hours. Fire reported on Cedar Avenue. No one survives. The voice was calm, methodical, detached, but beneath it, the static carried something else. A low, melodic hum, the same warped lullaby from before. My stomach flipped. I realized then that the tape wasn't just predicting deaths. It was marking them, giving them a rhythm, a melody, a song, like the dead themselves were guiding it. I tried to convince myself this was a recording from the past, that the sheriff had compiled reports, that the tape had been mislabeled, but the dates didn't match. Tomorrow, next week, the dates were all in the future. Future calls that would end in death. The tape hissed and the whispers returned. Remember? Help us! I could feel the sound pressing against my skull. My hands shook. I pressed pause again, breathing heavily, trying to push away the thought that the events were real, that people would die because I found this tape, because the warnings had been left behind. Then I did something I shouldn't have. I pressed play again. The static shifted, and a child's voice came through this time, unmistakable, chilling. They're coming. We're waiting. I dropped the recorder onto the desk, backing away slowly. My chest felt tight, heavy. My mind raced. How could a child's voice be on a recording made decades ago? How could it describe events that hadn't happened yet? I tried to rationalize, but nothing made sense. The room was alive with the sound, vibrating under my skin. The whispers seemed to crawl along the walls, curl around the office furniture, pressing against me from every angle. I remembered the toys, the handprints, the tremors beneath the soil at Lot 19. I remembered the sheriff's warning. Do not play at night. I understood now. Night brought vulnerability. Night brought the attention of whatever haunted the recordings, whatever animated the whispers and the lullaby. The tape continued. Each recording more vivid than the last. March 15 to 2,115 hours. Call reports strange singing from Lot 19. Missing child found near graves. Cause of death unknown. I froze. Lot 19. The mud. The toys. The handprints. The tremors. The voices beneath the soil. All the pieces fit together. A horrifying pattern I hadn't been prepared to see. The tape was alive with memory, grief, vengeance, or something beyond my understanding. Each call, each event, each death, it was orchestrated, documented, and preserved in sound. My hands trembled so badly I couldn't press pause. I sat there frozen, listening as the tape described events I hadn't yet witnessed, moments I knew were approaching, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. The tape wasn't just a warning. It was a record, a chronicle, and now I was part of it. The voice shifted again, this time higher, softer, more insistent. You see us, hear us, remember? I could feel the presence of something waiting behind the static, behind the speaker, something patient and eternal, something that had marked these deaths long before they happened. My rational mind struggled, tried to convince me I was imagining it, that fatigue and fear were making the tape speak in ways it couldn't. But deep down, I knew better. I tried to stop, tried to push the recorder away. My hands gripped it tightly, unable to let go. Static hissed. Then the voice of Sheriff Collins returned, weary and strained. Lot 19, the dead are patient. They do not forget. They wait for acknowledgement, for attention, for remembrance. If you hear this, do not ignore it. Do not walk away. The whispers returned underneath, soft, childlike, desperate. Help us remember we're still waiting. I leaned forward, my forehead almost touching the desk, pressing my hands against my temples. My mind spun. Each recording was a glimpse into the future. Each death a note in some terrible, endless song. And the children, somewhere in the mud, beneath the soil in Lot 19, they were orchestrating it all, guiding the events from beyond, shaping the deaths, shaping the recordings, shaping the world around me. The static pulsed. I could feel it vibrating through the floorboards, crawling up my legs. The whispers became clearer, almost intelligible, overlapping, weaving into a chorus. Remember, remember, we're still here. Do not forget us. I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see them, but I felt them in the room, surrounding the recorder, pressing against the air, anchoring themselves to me through sound and memory. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My voice stuck somewhere in my throat, muted, swallowed by the static and a lullaby in the waiting. The tape continued, each entry a countdown I couldn't stop. Each voice a reminder that the dead were not silent, that they had always been patient, waiting for someone to notice. And now they had noticed me. I was their witness, their listener, their recorder. I pressed pause finally, hands trembling violently. The office was quiet again, but the weight remained, pressing against my chest, crawling into my lungs. I couldn't leave the tape. I couldn't destroy it. I couldn't put it back in the locker. I had heard too much, seen too much. I was part of chronology now. Even as I left the office that night, my mind replayed the recordings, every date, every caller, every death described before it happened. I realized with sinking certainty that hearing the tape had changed something, that listening had bound me to the pattern, to the dead, to Lot 19, and I knew I wouldn't escape it. Not now, because the voices were patient. They had been waiting decades, and they would wait centuries if they had to. And now, so would I. I couldn't stop thinking about the tape recorder. The office smelled faintly of old paper and dust, and even in the fluorescent light, the shadows in the corners seemed to move. The memory of the lullabies, the whispers, the warnings of Sheriff Collins pressed at the edges of my mind. I told myself I shouldn't, but I had to listen again. I had to understand. I set the recorder on my desk, fingers trembling. The label stared up at me. Simple, direct. Do not play at night. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Rationally, I knew I was risking nothing more than fear and perhaps fatigue. But my gut told me this was more than just a recording. It was aware, alive in some way I couldn't yet name. I pressed play. Static first, as always, hissing, biting, thick and unrelenting. Then, faint beneath the noise, I heard it, my own voice. I froze. I hadn't recorded this tape. I hadn't even spoken to the recorder today. Not once. But there it was, my voice quiet, hesitant, describing exactly what I was doing. My own words, my own breath, reflected back at me from decades-old technology. The hairs on my arms rose. My pulse slammed in my chest. I'm listening again. I don't know why, but I can't stop. The tape, it's different tonight. I swallowed hard. My hands gripped the desk, knuckles white. The tape continued, my voice describing my movements, my thoughts, even the tremble of my fingers. And then I realized something terrible. The recording wasn't static. It was live. It was reacting. Every breath I took, every shiver, every blink was captured, twisted, and fed back to the recorder. I pressed pause. My chest heaved. Rationally, it shouldn't have been possible. Time, technology, none of it made sense. But my reflection in the recorder's plastic, distorted in the flickering light, confirmed it. I was hearing myself in real time, from the past, or maybe the future. I couldn't tell. I pressed play again. The tape hissed, then my voice came back. Faster this time. overlapping with my own breathing, my own heartbeat echoing in the background. I can't stop, it's here, it knows. I leaned forward, stomach twisting, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the tape, a feedback loop. But the sound intensified, layering my voice on top of itself, stretching, breaking, slowing, and speeding in impossible ways. The pauses were wrong. The timing was wrong. And yet, it matched my body perfectly. My breath, my pulse, my tremors, they were mirrored in the static. I pressed pause again, hands shaking violently. The office felt smaller, closer. Shadows pressed along the walls. My ears rang with the overlapping voices. My own words fragmented and twisted, whispering back at me. Listen, can't stop, do you hear? The tape skipped, a distortion rippling through the speakers. Then it shifted, rising in pitch until the sound was almost unbearable. And beneath it, I heard something else. Not my voice. Something else. Low, childlike, melodic. Familiar. The lullaby. The same one I had heard in the soil at Lot 19. The same one layered beneath Sheriff Collins' warnings. But now it was intertwined with my voice, bending around my words, responding to my thoughts, anticipating my fears. I fell back in my chair, gripping the edges. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The tape recorder pulsed with a sound, vibrating against the desk, vibrating through my fingertips. I couldn't stop staring at it. I couldn't stop listening. It was alive, aware, feeding on me, feeding on the sound of my own terror. I hear them. I see them. They're here. The words came faster now, overlapping, my own voice running into itself, skipping, repeating, fracturing, and then clear, faint, impossibly close, a whisper that wasn't mine. Finally, I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the tape alone. It was in the room, curling around me, brushing against my skin. My chest tightened. My pulse hammered. I pressed pause, pressed stop, tried to eject the tape, but my hands wouldn't obey. The recorder felt anchored to me, tethered to my fear, my curiosity, my attention. They're watching, listening. And then I heard it, beneath the static, beneath my own layered voice, the faint sound of breath. Not mine. Slow, deliberate, close. I could feel it behind me, in the corners, pressing against the air. My body froze, trapped between disbelief and terror. I turned, slowly, too slowly, as if moving itself might make it aware I had noticed. The office was empty. Fluorescent lights flickered. Dust motes danced in the air. But I could feel the presence, patient, waiting. The recorder pulsed again, and my voice returned, overlapping with the breath, overlapping with the whispers, overlapping with the lullaby. I can't. The tape hissed violently, then slowed, warping. My heartbeat echoed in the speakers, my breath elongated, warped, repeating in the static. And beneath it all, clearer now, the whisper. We're here, always here, watching you. I pressed stop, ejected the tape, dropped it onto the desk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lift my coffee mug. My mouth was dry. My chest burned. My mind refused to accept it. How could recording capture not just the past, but the present, the physical, the breathing, the tremor of my own fear? How could it know me? I thought back to Lot 19. The mud, the toys, the handprints pressed into the soil, the children's voices, their patience, their insistence. And I understood fully that the tape recorder was no longer just a device. It was a conduit, a bridge. It was alive in ways that were impossible, twisting time and sound, capturing memory and fear, waiting for me to participate, to listen, to become part of it. You're listening, you're here, don't stop. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. Every instinct screamed to leave, to throw the recorder out the window, to destroy it. But I was tethered, drawn, unable to let go. The voices layered over my own, responding to me, feeding on me. I realized then with a cold certainty that the recorder wasn't just aware. It was anticipating me, reacting, shaping the sound in real time, and I was the subject. The lullaby swelled, weaving around my own fragmented words, blending fear and memory, reality and hallucination. The office seemed to breathe with the tape. Shadows shifted with the rhythm, reaching, curling, pressing closer. I couldn't tell if it was a recorder or my mind, or both, but the sound was alive. Don't leave, stay, remember? I pressed pause again, flinging myself back in the chair. The room was silent. Fluorescent lights buzzed. Dust settled, but I knew it hadn't ended. My voice still echoed in my ears. My breath still repeated in the rhythm of static. The lullaby lingering in the corners. A presence that would not release me. I had become part of it. My voice, my breath, my fear, folded into the tape, layered onto the history of Sheriff Collins, layered onto the patient waiting of Lot 19. And I knew I would not escape it. I was bound now. The tape recorder sat on the desk, inert, silent, but I could feel it, watching, listening, waiting. And I knew that when I pressed play again, it would be ready, alive, aware, and I would be back in the spiral, caught between the sound of my own voice and the voices of those who have been waiting for decades, patient and eternal. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at my desk, staring at the recorder, listening to my own heartbeat and breathing echo in my mind, imagining the whispers and lullabies beneath the static. Morning came slow, gray, heavy, but the knowledge stayed. I had heard myself recorded in real time. I had been folded into the tape. And the voices, the children, the dead, whatever lingered in Lot 19 in the recorder, would wait for me, always. And I knew, with every pulse in my chest, every quiver of my hands, every shallow breath, that I would return. I would press play again. Because once you hear yourself in the tape, layered with fear and memory, there is no leaving. There is only listening, only participating, only waiting. I don't usually get called out at this hour. Most nights, the town sleeps and the only things moving are rats and occasional drunk stumbling home. But tonight, the radio crackled with something that made my stomach tighten. Someone missing near the old graveyard off Route 9. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, like she was trying not to sound worried, but I could hear it anyway. Sheriff, it's strange. Caller says there's a fog, thick, rolling in over the graves. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Fog wasn't unusual in these parts, but it never came this thick, this fast, like it swallowed the road hole. I'd driven past a graveyard hundreds of times. It always looked quiet, respectful, like it belonged to a world separate from ours. But tonight, even from a patrol car, I could see a wall of white creeping over the stones, and it felt wrong. By the time I reached the intersection where Route 9 dipped past the cemetery, the fog had already swallowed the headlights. I slowed to a crawl, trying to pick out the shapes of gravestones through the mist. They shimmered, almost like they were breathing. I shook my head, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. It's not the first time I've been called to look for someone. Missing kids, wandering drunks, old men who got lost fishing in the creek. But something about this felt heavier. The dispatcher's voice came again over the radio. Sheriff, the caller said they saw a figure walking between the stones. They didn't look right. Please be careful. I cursed under my breath. Figures in the fog. Every horror story I'd laughed at in the movies rushed into my mind. But this wasn't a movie. The fog here smelled wet and cold, like it had been sitting in the earth for years before deciding to crawl across the road. I parked the car at the edge of the cemetery, my boots sinking slightly into the wet ground as I stepped out. The mist wrapped around me immediately, thick and suffocating. I couldn't see the car behind me anymore, couldn't even see my hands when I held them out in front. The world had gone quiet. No crickets, no wind, just a kind of heavy, muffled silence that made every footstep sound wrong. I called out, my voice cracking without meaning to. Hello? Anyone there? Nothing. I started walking toward the old section of the graveyard, where the stones leaned at odd angles and moss had claimed most of the names. The fog was heavier here, curling around my ankles like water. My flashlight cut a pale circle through it. But every time I thought I caught a glimpse of something moving, it vanished when I blinked. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. I remembered the dispatcher, saying the person was last seen at the edge of the woods. I tried to picture them, a kid, maybe a young man, whoever it was. They had been standing here, somewhere among the graves, when the fog rolled in. My hand grazed the whetstone of a headstone. The letters were worn almost beyond recognition, but I could feel the ridges under my fingers. I shivered, and then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound. Barely there, like someone shuffling through dead leaves, but wet leaves, sticky with mud. I froze. My heart beat loud enough I was sure the fog could hear it. "Hey!" I called again, louder this time. "Sheriff's here. Step out." Nothing. I moved forward, careful, listening. The sound came again, closer now. I swung my flashlight in a wide arc, and for a split second I thought I saw someone or something slip behind a tree. My stomach churned. I reminded myself to breathe, to think rationally. But rational thoughts didn't help when the fog pressed in on all sides, when shadows flickered at the edges of my vision that shouldn't exist. I stopped near a particularly old plot. The stones were cracked, and the inscriptions had eroded almost entirely. Something about the place made my teeth chatter. My flashlight landed on a figure, or maybe it was just a trick of the fog. A tall shape, slouched, standing perfectly still. I stepped closer, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I had a job to do. "Hey!" I shouted. "You lost? Come out here." The shape didn't move. The fog seemed to thicken around it, and for a heartbeat, I swore it was staring right at me. Not with eyes, but with nothing, an absence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I took another step forward, and then it was gone. Just gone, like the fog had swallowed a whole. I cursed again, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. My mind raced. Maybe it was a prank, someone trying to scare me. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks. But even as I tried to reason it out, I felt a pressure in my chest, a tightening that told me this wasn't normal. I wandered deeper into the fog, calling out intermittently. Every now and then, I thought I heard whispers. Faint, almost inaudible, like voices carried on a breeze, but there was no breeze. Just fog, and the dragging sound persisted. Sometimes behind me, sometimes to the side, always just out of sight. The cold seeped through my coat, biting at my skin. I pressed on. I had to find them. Whoever had gone missing, I had to find them before whatever this was swallowed them completely. Then I stumbled into it. Not a person, not quite. A shape, crouched low, pressed against a gravestone. Mud and fog clung to it. I froze, my stomach twisting. "Hey," I said softly. "It's okay. It moved. Fast. Too fast. And in that instant, I realized it wasn't human. Not really. Its movements were wrong. Jerky in the places a body shouldn't be jerky. My flashlight caught a glimpse of its face. Or what I thought was a face. Hollow, pale, with eyes that reflected no light. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root. The figure didn't follow, but it didn't disappear either. It just watched, and the fog rolled closer, thicker, as if it had a mind of its own. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. My radio crackled. Static at first, then the dispatcher's voice again. "Sheriff? You there?" I swallowed, trying to get my voice under control. I'm here. I see something. Not sure what it is. I need backup." There was a pause, then, "We're sending someone. Stay put." Stay put. Right. Like I could just stand here in this creeping white nightmare. But when I looked around, the road back was gone. The patrol car, the street lights, even the edge of the cemetery. I couldn't see any of it. Just fog. And the shape. I tried to remember my training. Keep calm. Keep your breathing steady. Keep your eyes on the target. But nothing about this was normal. Nothing about this was explainable. And then I realized I was holding my breath again. The fog pressed closer. It whispered. Not words I could understand, just tones. Mocking. Hungry. Patient. I backed away slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hands. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. And then, from somewhere deep in the fog, I heard a voice. Not a whisper, not a murmur. Clear. Human. Sheriff. I spun around, pointing my light. But there was no one, just the fog. And then another voice, closer, louder, My stomach dropped. I recognized it immediately. It was the missing person, calling for me. But when I ran toward the sound, the ground shifted beneath me. The fog twisted, almost alive, and I tripped again. I slammed my hand into a gravestone. Letters I couldn't read scraped my skin. I felt a shape brush past me, just a whisper, a shadow. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to wake up. But I couldn't. I could only stand there, soaked in cold, clutching my flashlight, listening to voices calling from everywhere and nowhere. And the fog over Route 9 was endless, and it was waiting. The fog hadn't lifted by the time I caught my breath. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the flashlight. I told myself to calm down. I'm a sheriff. I've seen drunks, fights, accidents. I've seen people do things that make you question humanity. But this was different. I scanned the mist again. Shadows swirled like smoke, twisting and folding into themselves. And that's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A figure stepping out of the white, like someone had painted them in from another time. She wore a sheriff's jacket, old, faded, stitched decades ago, with brass buttons dull from age. The badge was nearly polished off, but I could see the outline. She walked slowly, deliberately, into the fog. No sound of boots on wet earth, no crunch of leaves. She moved like the fog itself carried her. My heart hammered. I should have called out. I should have stayed put. But something about her pulled me forward, and before I knew it, I was walking into the cold, choking mist. "Ma'am," I said, my voice cracking. "Are you okay?" No answer. She didn't turn, just walked deeper into the white, and I followed, feeling the ground sink slightly beneath each step. The gravestones here were older, worn nearly smooth, names long gone. It felt like stepping into another world, a time that had been buried and forgotten. I tried to shake it off. Maybe she was lost. Maybe someone had dressed in an old uniform as a prank. But nothing about her felt human. Her movements were too precise, too slow, too deliberate, like she had rehearsed them 1,000 times over decades. I couldn't count. I remembered the dispatcher's words from last night. Be careful. I thought I had been careful. I thought I could handle what was out here. But now, following this figure into the fog, I felt like I was drowning, every step heavier than the last. "Ma'am," I said again, "do you need help?" The fog shifted. Her outline blurred for a heartbeat, then sharpened again, and I swore I saw her turn her head, just slightly, to look at me, not with eyes I could see, but with a weight that pressed into my chest. Recognition, or a warning. I couldn't tell. I swallowed. I told myself not to panic. She's just a person in an old uniform. But my mind started wandering, remembering stories my grandfather told me when I was a kid. Stories about the old sheriff who disappeared along Route 9 in the 70s. They said he walked into the fog one night and never came back. People joked that he became part of it, that he still walked the roads at midnight. I laughed at those stories then, laughed at the idea of ghosts and fog. But now I wasn't so sure. The woman stopped, just for a second, and in that pause I saw her face. Or maybe it wasn't her face. Pale, gaunt, eyes hollow like someone had scooped them out and left empty sockets. I felt my stomach turn. My legs wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the soft, muddy ground. She stepped again, and this time the fog seemed to ripple around her, folding over itself like water. She walked slowly, carefully, and I realized she was leading me somewhere. Not me in the patrol car, not anyone else, just me. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand answers. But the words caught in my throat. My breath came in shallow bursts. I could hear it, the fog moving, almost whispering around me. Every so often I thought I heard faint voices, echoes from decades ago. Children laughing, horses clopping, a man's voice calling orders. It didn't belong here, and yet it felt as if it did. I followed her until I couldn't tell where the path ended. The gravestones thinned out into a patch of bare earth. The fog was almost solid here, pressing against my chest like a living thing. The woman stopped, slowly, deliberately, She turned to face me fully, and then she raised her hand, not to wave, not to signal, but to point. I looked in the direction she was pointing, and that's when I saw it. A grave, old and sunken, its marker cracked and faded. The name was half erased, but I knew immediately. This was the grave of the sheriff from the stories, from the rumors. My grandfather had mentioned him. People said he disappeared one night, swallowed by fog that rolled in and never left. I wanted to speak, to ask who she was, but the sound of my own voice seemed absurd here. The fog swallowed everything. I felt small, fragile, a stranger in a place that didn't belong to this time. Then she moved again, closer this time. I noticed her uniform in more detail. The stitching was strange, not like anything made in a factory. It looked almost grown, like the jacket had formed on her over years of waiting, decades of watching. The badge glinted briefly in the faint light of my flashlight, and I swore I saw something move in its reflection. Shapes, not quite human, reaching out. I stepped back. My foot hit the edge of a gravestone, sending mud and moss flying. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just walked into the fog, fading as she went, leaving me alone with the smell of wet earth and old stones. I wanted to follow, but a voice, my own, almost whispered in my head, "Don't go." I stayed frozen. The fog around me shifted, and I realized the path she had taken was gone. Just empty mist now. The sound of dripping water, leaves. Something scraping, it surrounded me. I could feel it pressing into my skin, cold and patient. I thought about calling the dispatcher again, telling someone what I saw. But how could I explain it? A woman, in a decades-old uniform, leading me through fog to a grave of a long-dead sheriff? No one would believe me. I wouldn't believe me. I remembered the missing person from last night, the sound of their voice calling through the fog. I shivered, wondering if this woman had something to do with them, if they were still here, somewhere trapped in this timeless mist. The fog began to thin slightly. Morning was coming, but the edges of Route 9 were still hidden. My patrol car came into view, headlights hazy but reassuring. I exhaled a long, shaky breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly. But when I looked back toward the graveyard, the mist swirled and thickened again, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw her standing there, watching, not moving, just standing, waiting. And then she was gone. I sat in the car a long time, staring at the fog. The image burned into my mind. Who was she? What was she? And why did I feel like I had been meant to see her? Like she had been expecting me all along. I started the engine. The hum of it was almost comforting. Almost. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog was still following, trailing behind my headlights, waiting. Waiting for the next time the road was empty. Waiting for me. And I knew I would see her again. The fog followed me like it had a mind of its own. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, it seemed to stretch further, curling over the edges of the road, creeping into the trees. My patrol car's engine hummed under my hands, but the comfort of it felt shallow, meaningless. Something in the mist was wrong. It wasn't just weather. It wasn't just night. I tried the radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff. Do you copy?" Static, then a pause, then nothing. I repeated it, again and again, every time just a hiss of static. My stomach twisted. Normally, the dispatcher responds immediately, keeps you grounded, keeps the hours from feeling like they stretch into something infinite. But now nothing. No acknowledgement. No reassurance. Just silence. I reached the car door to step out. The lock clicked and the handle gave. I froze. The door had been unlocked when I arrived. I must have locked it automatically. I tried again. Locked. Then unlocked. Then locked. I yanked on the handle once, twice, panic rising in my chest. The truck was alive, playing a cruel game, and I didn't like it. Not one bit. I forced myself to breathe. Calm down. Just check the fog. Check the road. And that's when I saw her again. The woman in the old sheriff's jacket. She was walking slowly, deliberately, deeper into the mist, into the thick, suffocating white. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge me, but I felt her pulling me forward, even without touching me. It was like gravity had changed. I knew I should stay in the truck, call for backup, wait for the fog to lift, but I couldn't. Something, fear, curiosity, a mix of both, pushed me after her. I stepped into the fog. The air was damp and cold, wrapping around my clothes and sticking to my skin. My flashlight barely penetrated more than a few feet ahead, cutting through the mist in shaky, pale circles. Each step felt heavier than the last. I tried to remember the sound of my own heartbeat, tried to convince myself that I wasn't already panicking, but my chest felt like it was full of lead. I called out again. "Hey, wait!" The fog swallowed my words. They came back as echoes, softer, distant, like the fog itself was mocking me. And then the truck clicked again. The locks engaged, disengaged, like something inside it was watching me, playing with me. I wanted to run back, wanted to slam the doors and leave, but my feet kept moving forward. The woman stopped, just out of reach of my flashlight beam. I thought for a moment she might vanish like last time, but she didn't. She stood there, still almost patient, and that's when I noticed it. She was pointing again, not at a grave, not at anything I could see, but at the ground between the roots of an old oak. I knelt, shining the light. Mud, leaves, and something else. Tracks deep ones, clawed, uneven, not human, not completely. I felt bile rise in my throat. My hands shook. Whatever she was leading me toward wasn't alive in any way I wanted to understand. I stood up, trying to force my voice steady. "Who? What are you?" She didn't answer. She never did. She just turned and kept walking, and I followed. Each step I took sank into the soft earth. The fog thickened around me, muffling sound, twisting everything into shadows. I started to feel dizzy, unsteady, as if the fog wasn't just cold. It was pressing, weighing down on me, trying to push me into the dirt. The truck's locks clicked again behind me. I spun. The light from inside flickered through the fog. Door locked, door unlocked, and then silence. No engine, no lights, just a shadowy outline that looked like the cab, blurred and distorted. My stomach churned. Was that real, or was it the fog playing tricks? I pressed forward anyway. My hands were slicked with sweat despite the cold. The sound of my own breathing sounded loud, almost loud enough to drown out the soft drag of her steps ahead. Every now and then, I thought I heard whispers, barely audible, like the fog was speaking to me in voices I didn't know but somehow recognized. Memories that weren't mine. Maybe a child laughing in the distance, a man shouting orders in a voice older than I should have heard. And then the figure stopped again, closer this time. I could see the old sheriff's badge on her chest glint in the pale beam, but it wasn't a reflection from my flashlight. Something inside it shone, faintly, like it had been lit from the inside for decades. I felt a pull toward it, stronger than gravity, stronger than fear. My legs moved before my mind could protest. The radio hissed again, brief static, then a faint whisper. Not dispatch, not anything I recognized. A voice I thought I would never hear. Turn back. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. The fog seemed to pulse with the voice, twisting, tightening around me. My heart thundered. The truck's door clicked again. Locked, unlocked, locked. I yanked at the handle, desperate. It wouldn't budge. I realized then that the road behind me was gone. The headlights of the truck, the familiar lines of Route 9, even the thin glow of distant streetlights. Everything had vanished. The fog was complete. I was inside it, and it was inside me. I tried the radio one more time. "Dispatch, please respond. I need..." Silence. I shouted again. My own voice echoed in strange ways, bouncing off unseen walls, stretching and distorting until it sounded like another person entirely. My knees were weak. The mud clung to my boots, clinging like hands trying to drag me down. The woman moved forward again, slowly, deliberately, and I followed because I had no choice, because the fog was alive and I could feel it watching, waiting. Something brushed past me in the mist. Not the woman. Something larger, heavier, My flashlight swung wildly, catching shapes that weren't there a moment ago. Branches that moved like arms. Shadows that bent unnaturally. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and the locks on the truck clicked again. Unlocked. Locked. Unlocked. I realized I couldn't trust anything anymore. Not the fog, not the truck, not even my own senses. Every step forward felt like stepping into a dream or a nightmare. I remembered last night, the missing person, the dragging sound to the graveyard. I felt the same now, following this woman into something older, deeper, something that had been waiting for me all along. The woman stopped near a cluster of old stones I couldn't recognize. My light caught on a shape protruding from the earth. A hand? No. Too pale, too smooth. Something carved into mud. Etched like a message but unreadable, letters twisting into themselves. I knelt to examine it. Cold seeped into my bones. The fog swirled, shifting, and I realized the marks were fresh. Someone or something was here before me, waiting, watching. I looked up and she was gone. Not vanished, not hidden. Gone like she had never been there. My chest tightened. My legs felt like lead. The fog pressed harder, and I heard it then, a low, mournful whispering, filling the air, wrapping around me, brushing against my ears. Names, voices, memories, all mixed together. And then, something I could feel more than hear. The locks again, clicking, over and over. The truck, behind me, alive, watching, waiting. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't. I was trapped between fear and obedience, between curiosity and self-preservation. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from where she had been, from what I might have missed. The whispering grew louder. Not voices this time. Words. Commands. Follow. Stay. Join. I stumbled backward, mud and roots tearing at my boots, and realized I didn't even know which way was safe anymore. The fog thickened further. The woman, where she had been, was now just a shadow, an outline, a memory pressed into the mist. And the truck, my only link to the normal world, locked one final time. I was alone, and I knew, deep down, that dispatch wouldn't answer. Not tonight. Not ever again. I took a step forward, and the fog shifted, and I realized I had no choice but to follow. The fog had changed. It wasn't just thick anymore, it was almost solid, curling around the gravestones, sticking to my skin, pressing down on my shoulders. Every breath I drew was wet and heavy, like I was inhaling the mist itself. My flashlight barely cut through it, a weak circle of pale light in a sea of white. I stumbled forward, following the faint trail where the woman in the old sheriff's jacket had led me. The ground was soft, waterlogged, and uneven, and I kept catching my boots on roots and old stones. My hands shook, gripping the flashlight, so tightly I thought I might crush it. The radio was dead. Dispatch was gone. The truck's locks had stopped clicking, or maybe I'd stopped noticing them, too consumed by the fog, by the shapes shifting just beyond my vision. And then I saw the first one, a grave marker, small and low, barely poking out of mud, but the shape of it was unmistakable. It was a sheriff's badge, carved crudely into the stone, tarnished and dark with age. I froze. My stomach clenched, so hard it hurt to breathe. I crouched closer, trying to make sense of it. The badge looked old, older than anything I'd ever seen, but the engraving was fresh enough to be almost readable. I kept moving, stepping carefully over sodden roots and wet earth, and one by one more appeared. Gravestones that were supposed to be normal, generic, now had sheriff badges etched into them. Every single one. Every name was scratched roughly onto the metal or carved into the stone, and each one carried the weight of someone who had worn the badge, who had answered calls and walked these streets long before I was born. And then I saw it. Mine. The crude letters scratched into a stone, half erased by mud and weather, but unmistakable. My name. My badge number. My position. It wasn't just a grave marker. It was a claim, a warning, a promise. I stepped back, tripping over a root, my hand skimming the surface of the wet earth. My mind spun, trying to rationalize it. I'm a sheriff. I've seen weird, yes, I've dealt with strange cases. But this wasn't just strange. This was personal. I knelt closer, tracing the letters with a trembling hand. They were rough, uneven, like someone had carved them in a hurry. My fingers trembled as I pulled them back, wet and cold. A memory came unbidden. My grandfather telling me stories of Route 9, of a sheriff who disappeared decades ago, swallowed by fog. His badge never recovered. I laughed nervously when I was a kid. I didn't laugh now. Something moved behind me, just a shadow. But I felt it press against the back of my neck, and my heart jumped into my throat. I swung my flashlight around. Nothing. The fog swallowed it all again. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, that my mind was breaking in the cold and damp. But I knew better. It wasn't my mind. It wasn't the weather. Something here was alive, watching, waiting. I moved to the next grave. Another badge, another name, and then I noticed something terrifying. The badges weren't just scratched into the stones. Some of them glowed faintly. Not light from my flashlight, not reflection. Just faint, eerie, like something beneath the surface. A faint shimmer, like the badge itself was breathing, pulsing with some long-forgotten energy. I swallowed hard. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back, to run, to leave this place, this cursed fog, these unholy markers. But my feet carried me forward. Each step sank into the mud. Each breath tasted colder, heavier, like the fog was trying to pull the air from my lungs. Then I saw her again, the woman, standing at the edge of the markers, almost blending into the fog. Her badge gleamed faintly under the light, and I realized she was watching me, not the gravestones, not the badges. Me. I felt her attention, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to speak. Why is this here? Why my name? She didn't answer. She never did. Instead, she took a step forward toward the next grave, and I followed. I couldn't tell if I was moving faster or slower. The fog seemed to shift beneath my boots, folding, thickening, guiding me. And then I noticed something else. The graves weren't random. They were arranged in a pattern, almost like a map, like someone or something had laid them out deliberately. And at the center, my grave, I knelt again, staring down at the crude letters. My mind tried to process it. This wasn't just a warning. It was a place set aside for me. For what? I didn't want to think about it. I wanted to flee. I wanted to scream. But the fog held me, and the woman, the uniform, the badge, everything held me too. A sound broke the silence. Soft at first, almost inaudible, then louder. Footsteps? No. Dragging. Heavy, deliberate, scraping against the soft earth. I spun, flashlight cutting across the fog, and saw shapes moving among the graves. Shadows that weren't human, moving unnaturally, limbs bending wrong, heads tilting too far. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. My chest ached. The woman lifted her hand. Not to wave, not to beckon, but to point. At me, at my grave. I wanted to run. My legs trembled, but my body wouldn't obey. Something held me there, anchored me to the mud and cold. The dragging sound grew closer, circling. And the fog, it wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside me, pressing against my skin, my lungs, my thoughts. I remembered last night, the missing person, their voice in the fog. I had ignored it, thought I could control it, but the fog remembered. The fog waited. And now, standing among grave markers and badges, I felt the truth. I was meant to be here. Me, my name etched in stone, my badge claiming a place. And the woman, she was the guide, the keeper, the reminder of what this place demanded. I knelt again at my grave. I touched the letters, rough and cold. The badge at the top shimmered faintly, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. My mind raced. Questions I didn't want answers to. How long had this been here? Who or what put it here? And why me? The woman stepped closer, slowly, every movement deliberate. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting pale light over her badge, over the rows of graves. I realized I was shaking, not just from cold, but from fear from realization. This wasn't just Route 9. This wasn't just fog. This was something older, something patient, something that collected those who wore the badge, those who answered the calls, those who walked the roads at night. I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. The fog pressed closer. Shapes move again, circling, watching, waiting. And I understood. The graves weren't just markers. They were invitations. They were claims. They were warnings. And mine was next. The woman tilted her head, slowly, patiently. And in that movement, I saw it clearly. The fog wasn't random. The badges weren't random. The graves weren't random. Everything here was deliberate, calculated. And I had been led here, by her, by the fog, by the weight of something I couldn't fight. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. But my boots were stuck in mud. My heart was racing. My mind was screaming. And the fog had no edges anymore. It wasn't just Route 9 now. It was inside me, around me, filling me with its cold, patient knowledge. I swallowed, shivering, and I realized I had no choice but to follow, to obey, to accept the place marked for me. The woman took another step forward, and I followed. I didn't know how long I moved through that fog, through the graves, through the shapes that whispered and watched. I only knew the badges, the names, the weight of history pressing down on me. And when I looked down at my own grave again, I felt it. Not fear, exactly. Not yet. Something colder. Acceptance. The fog curled around my shoulders. The woman's badge glinted in the pale light, and I knew I had crossed a threshold I could never return from. The fog lifted. Not slowly. Not gently. It didn't curl away or fade into the night. It was gone in a single heartbeat, as if it had never existed. One moment I was swallowed in white, my breath thick and heavy, my heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. And the next, the world was clear. I blinked. My flashlight was useless now. I didn't need it. The moon cast pale silver light over the graveyard, over the stones, over the earth that had been pressed and shaped by decades I couldn't place. But it wasn't the graveyard I remembered. Not from last night. Not from childhood stories. Not from the faded memories of the old cemetery along Route 9. This graveyard was older. Older than I had ever imagined. The stones were crisper, cleaner, though cracked in ways that suggested age. The grass was shorter, tended. There were no puddles, no mud, no smell of wet earth and decay. No fog, just stillness, silence, and a strange, heavy air that pressed against my chest in a way that felt familiar. I took a step forward. My boots made soft impressions in the grass, impressions that didn't belong to anyone else. I realized with a jolt that I was alone. No woman, no shadows, just the stones, the grass, and the pale moonlight. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning the headstones. They were small, neat, old-fashioned, names I didn't recognize, dates that didn't make sense. Every grave had a badge etched into it, a sheriff's badge, tiny uniform, polished in a way that seemed impossible in the moonlight. I moved from stone to stone, trying to make sense of it. My fingers brushed the cold stone, tracing names I didn't know. And then I saw it, a headstone set apart from the rest, larger, with a metal plate attached to it. A photo, black and white, grainy, worn around the edges. I froze. My stomach dropped. My heart stopped. It was me, smiling, looking at the camera with a relaxed grin, uniform crisp, badge shining faintly. The date at the bottom said 1967. I staggered back. My knees hit the soft grass, and I sank down, hands pressed to my mouth. My pulse thundered in my ears. I couldn't breathe. My mind reeled, trying to twist it into something rational. A twin? A relative? A joke? But the face, it was mine. Every line, every curve, every expression. Mine. I looked around desperately, trying to find the woman in the uniform, some explanation. But she was gone. No trace. Just the stones, the badges, and the photo of me smiling from decades before I existed. I pressed my fingers to the plate, cold and hard under my touch. The stone beneath it wasn't wet. The earth wasn't soft. It was firm, solid, permanent. My thumb brushed the engraving, tracing letters I knew by heart. My name, my badge number. The date of death was blank. Yet somehow I knew it. Somehow I knew it wasn't just a photograph. Memories or visions flooded me. Snippets of another time, another life. I could see myself walking the streets of the town in the 1960s. I could see the fog rolling in even then, covering the roads, swallowing people whole. I could feel the weight of the badge on my chest, older than I should have been, yet familiar. I could hear voices, dispatchers, townsfolk, children playing, men laughing in the warmth of sunlight that never quite reached me. I tried to shake it off. I'm a sheriff. I'm alive. I'm here. This can't be real. But it was. The grass, the stones, the photo, all of it. Real. Too real. I got to my feet, hands trembling, and started walking among the graves. Each badge seemed to pulse faintly under the moonlight, a heartbeat of history, a memory etched into stone. Every name I passed made me shiver. I didn't recognize them. I didn't know them, but I felt their weight, the weight of their service, their sacrifices, their presence trapped in this place, in this moment. I stopped at another grave, smaller this time. No photograph, just a badge etched carefully into the stone. The name was familiar, a sheriff who had disappeared long before I was born. One of the stories my grandfather had told me. He'd walked into the fog along Route 9 one night and never returned. I swallowed. I realized I was trembling from head to toe. The fog hadn't just lifted. It had shifted something in me, something that reached into the past, into a life I didn't know I had lived, into a history I couldn't escape. The photo of me in 1967 called to me in a way I couldn't explain. I stepped closer again, crouching down. My reflection in the black and white image seemed to move almost imperceptibly. My lips twitched in the photo. My eyes blinked ever so slightly. I leaned in closer, heart hammering, breath fogging in the cool night air. Then I heard it, a voice, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. My own voice, older, colder, echoing from somewhere inside me or from somewhere else entirely. You come back. I jerked upright, my flashlight useless, my senses heightened. The air was still. The graveyard looked the same. And yet I knew it wasn't. Time had shifted. Not just the fog, not just the graves. It was me. I had shifted. Something had changed. I looked down at the photo again. My eyes met mine. The photo seemed to smile knowingly, as if it understood something I didn't. Something I was only beginning to comprehend. I remembered the woman, the fog, the graves, all marked with badges, the trucks locking and unlocking themselves, dispatch gone, the missing person, everything that had led me here, everything that felt like horror, like accident, like chance. It wasn't. It had been deliberate, purposeful, calculated. And now I understood. The shift wasn't just a fog clearing. The shift wasn't just seeing my own face decades before I existed. The shift was me. The shift was complete. I stood among the graves, feeling the cold air on my skin, the moonlight brushing over the stones, and I realized I could feel the other sheriffs here. Their presence, not threatening, not friendly, just waiting, watching. A history I hadn't known I belonged to, stretching back decades, reaching forward through me. I felt the weight of my badge, not the one on my chest, not the one on my photo, but the one etched into the earth, into the stones, into the history of Route 9. I felt it anchor me to this place, to the lineage of men and women who had walked these streets, who had answered the calls, who had vanished into the fog. I wanted to turn and run, to scream, to break free, but I couldn't. The history, the fog, the badges, they weren't just around me anymore. They were inside me. The shift wasn't just external. It was internal, complete. I walked slowly through the graveyard, touching the badges, touching the stones, acknowledging each one. The fog that had disappeared was still present in some invisible way, pressing at my shoulders, whispering at the edges of my mind. I felt the pulse of each badge, the memory of every sheriff, every call, every night on these streets, feeding into me, making me part of something I didn't fully understand. I knelt again at my own grave. My fingers pressed against the stone, the photograph, the badge. The photo smiled, and I realized I was smiling too. Not out of joy, not out of relief, but because I understood. Somehow I understood. The shift was complete. I was here. I had always been here. And now I belonged. A whisper brushed against my ear. Not threatening, not cruel. Just a reminder. Remember. Serve. Wait. I stood. I looked around at the graves, the badges, the moonlit stones. My reflection in the photograph felt alive, real, a part of me and yet something separate. I could feel the past and the present, the fog and the history, converging. And I knew the shift wasn't over. It never ends. It doesn't end. It only waits. And now, so do I. I still remember the morning we got the order. It was cold, the kind of early October chill that seeps past your jacket and settles into your bones. I had been a deputy for years by then, the kind of years that make your hands steady and your stomach stubbornly quiet at the things you see. But that morning, when Captain Harris called me into the office, I felt my stomach churn anyway. Exhumation, he said without preamble. Just that one word. Sheriff Callahan. Grave. I blinked. My first thought was some kind of mistake. Callahan had been dead for nearly a decade. Retired, disgraced, gone. That whole town thought he'd been buried quietly in the cemetery out past the ridge. A simple plot with a weathered stone and a bouquet of those cheap plastic flowers that no one bothered to replace. Why? I asked. My voice sounded small, even to me. Harris's eyes were flat. He didn't blink. Orders from the DA. Corruption case. New evidence. Doesn't matter what the evidence is. You go. You dig. You find out if he's really there or not. I nodded, though it felt like nodding toward a cliff edge. We grabbed our gear later that morning, me and two other deputies, Lopez and Garrett. The sun was low, gray, and heavy. Fog hung over the graves like a warning. Driving out there, I kept staring at the horizon, thinking maybe I could will the whole thing away. Maybe if I didn't go, if I didn't dig, then nothing bad would happen. But of course, that's not how these things work. The cemetery looked smaller than I remembered. The fence was rusty, the gate leaning. The rows of headstones seemed to lean in toward each other, whispering secrets. The ground was soft from last week's rain. I could smell the wet earth, that pungent, sweet smell that always reminds me of graves, of things that stay buried for a reason. We found the plot easily enough. Callahan's headstone was simple, the letters worn but readable. Sheriff Thomas Callahan, 1948 to 2006. Lopez shook his head. Man, I didn't think I'd ever be here doing this. Neither did I. I admitted. My gloves felt heavy. The shovel was heavier. Every step toward that dirt was like stepping into a dream I didn't want to have. One of those dreams where you know you're going to wake up screaming, but you don't. We started digging. The ground resisted at first, the earth clumping around the edges, wet and stubborn. I could hear Garrett swearing under his breath. Lopez muttered something about old bones and bad luck. And all the while, I kept glancing at that stone, at the name etched there. Like maybe if I looked hard enough, I'd see a face behind it, a flicker of life that had been gone too long. Hours passed, and the hole grew. The sun barely moved. Shadows pooled in the pit. And then, when we were finally at the right depth, 6 feet, as per the order, I felt a sick twist in my stomach. The coffin was gone. Not cracked, not open, not disturbed. Gone. Empty. I stared at the mud around the pit, at the disturbed earth, at nothing. Lopez dropped his shovel. What the hell? His voice was tight, trembling. I couldn't speak. I wanted to say something rational, something that would explain it, but the words wouldn't come. The box should have been there, should have been heavy with decay, with the weight of years and secrets. But there was nothing, only wet earth and the faint smell of something that made my throat tighten. Iron and rot, but not like a grave, like something else. Garrett finally said it, in a whisper that seemed too loud. Someone moved him. I shook my head. No, it's been 10 years. Why now? My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. echoing in a tunnel that didn't exist. Lopez crouched at the edge of the hole, fingers brushing the soil. Maybe it was never him. Maybe the body was wrong. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to shout that he didn't understand. But deep down, I realized I was thinking the same thing. That the story we'd all been told, the one we all believed, might have been a lie. A careful, neat lie, and now it was unraveling in front of us. Wet and muddy and impossible. I leaned against the edge of the pit, the cold biting through my jacket. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud enough to drown out the distant traffic on the ridge. I thought about Callahan, about his tenure as sheriff, the rumors, the quiet whispers we never spoke aloud, about the nights I'd spent listening to him berate suspects, berate people who might not have deserved it, about the envelopes that went missing, the reports that never made it to the county office, about the smell of old whiskey on his breath when he passed me in the hall. And now he wasn't there. Not here, not on the ground, not anywhere that made sense. Captain's going to want to report, Lopez said finally. His voice was tight again. We need to call in. I shook my head. We need to finish digging. Something has to be here. We kept at it, widening the hole, removing roots that had grown through the soil like gnarled fingers. Each layer we pulled back felt heavier, thicker, as if the earth itself were resisting the truth. I dug with methodical rage, my arms aching, my hands raw, tried to force reality to comply with what I knew to be real. But reality wasn't listening. At the bottom, there was only dirt, and then, faintly, a smell that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't decay exactly. It was something metallic, almost like blood, but old, older than anything I could identify. My stomach twisted. My fingers clenched around the handle of the shovel. I didn't speak. I didn't want to breathe too deeply. Lopez stepped back. Garrett didn't move. I felt a creeping panic that wasn't rational, a memory clawing at the back of my mind that I couldn't name. And then I saw it. A single scrap of fabric, caught on a root, gray with age, faded. Not a uniform, not a coat. Something else. Something that had been there, but wasn't meant to be. I reached for it with a trembling hand. The moment my fingers brushed the fibers, the wind picked up, fog rolled in thick, and the cemetery seemed to close in on us. Shadows stretched across the ground, and I swear I heard a voice. Just one, soft, impossible to place. Why are you here? I jerked back, heart hammering. Lopez hissed. Garrett said nothing, but I saw his hands shaking. The fog thickened, the world narrowing to the hole, to the empty coffin, to the thing that wasn't there. We called it, and then we stopped digging. There was nothing left to uncover in the dirt. But the unease followed me back to the truck, all the way into town, into the office, into the hollow quiet of my apartment that night. Every shadow felt heavier. Every creak in the floor sounded like footsteps I couldn't place. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the absence of a body where one should have been, about the empty coffin, about the smell, about the fabric, about the voice that wasn't anyone we knew. And I realized with a sudden clarity that made my stomach lurch, that the thing we were investigating wasn't just corruption, wasn't just mismanagement or old secrets. It was something that had been lying in wait, patient, quiet, invisible, and somehow, in exhuming the past, we had awakened it. Sleep didn't come that night, and when it finally did, it was thin and uneasy, like trying to rest under the weight of unseen eyes. I dreamt of the cemetery, of the pit, of a shadow moving under the soil, shifting, waiting. I dreamt of the name on the headstone, smiling at me in a way that wasn't human. I woke up soaked in sweat, the sun barely peeking over the ridge, and I knew one thing for certain. Callahan wasn't in that grave. And if he wasn't in that grave, then he was somewhere else, watching, waiting, and whatever had taken him there was still out there too. I thought the unease would fade once we left the cemetery. I thought the empty grave, the fog, the voice that wasn't anyone we knew. Maybe it was just adrenaline, stress, the weight of decades-old secrets finally pressing down. I was wrong. It started the first night after the exhumation. I woke up drenched, sheets tangled around my legs like roots. At first, I couldn't remember where I was. My apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of the heater. But then I remembered the cemetery, the pit, the empty coffin, and a chill ran along my spine that no blanket could chase away. The dream started soon after. I've never been a person who remembers much when I sleep, but these were different. They felt alive. I was back at the sheriff's lot, the old parking lot where the department still kept its fleet of cruisers. Only it wasn't day. It was night, always night. The streetlights buzzed and flickered, casting yellow circles over black asphalt that stretched farther than it should. Every time I tried to leave, I couldn't. The gates, the roads, even the trees seemed to twist just out of reach, trapping me in that endless lot. I was walking the dark, the gravel crunching under my boots. The cars waited silently, lined up like graves themselves, their windshields reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. And I could hear him. Not Callahan exactly, not a voice I could name, but something pressing down on my mind, insistent, patient. Stay. The other deputies weren't immune. Lopez called me the next morning, voice shaky, the line filled with static even though it was a clear connection. Dean, his words stumbled. It's the same. Every night. I keep coming back to the lot. Can't leave. I don't sleep. I wake up back there. Garrett said nothing for 2 days. Then he came into the office, pale, dark circles under his eyes, hands gripping the edge of his desk like he needed it to hold him up. I'm walking again, he said quietly, almost apologetically. I'm back there, and it's not the same. It's different each night, but I always wake up here, the badge on my chest, the key in my hand, and I'm trapped. I can't leave. We all stopped talking about it after that. Not really. Not in the open. Because when you do, the words feel heavier, like they're somehow feeding the thing that's waiting. But we notice the small signs, the cracks in our routines. The coffee cups left untouched, the nervous glances, the way our hands shook when we touched our badges, the way it would seem literal sometimes, pressing down, pinching my chest like someone was leaning on me from behind. I started noticing patterns in my dreams. The lot was familiar, yes, but it wasn't entirely the same. The patrol cars moved differently at night, their headlights splitting the darkness in ways they shouldn't. The parking lines faded into mud in some places, and in others, the asphalt cracked open into deep shadows. Every time I approached the gate, it stretched farther, the fences bending away from me. I tried running. I tried shouting. The lot didn't answer. The lot waited. Sometimes, in the corners of my dreams, I'd see something crouched near a cruiser, not fully formed, more like a smear of darkness, hunched, watching. I never got close enough to see it properly. I couldn't, and every time I blinked it was gone, or maybe it was always just there, waiting for me to look somewhere else. Sleep became a battlefield. I drifted into it reluctantly, every fiber of my being aware that the lot was waiting. The dreams didn't follow logic. One night, I'd be walking toward the evidence room. The next, I'd find the lot stretching into some impossible expanse, the lights buzzing like dying insects, the cars silent and accusing. My uniform felt heavier with each shift, the badge burning my chest, and always that pressure, that unshakable sense that someone was watching me, judging me, measuring me. I began waking up before dawn, drenched in sweat, my breath shallow, hands trembling on the edge of the bed. I'd stare at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. The fan in my apartment became a clock, counting down the hours to the next dream, each hum a reminder that the night would return. Lopez admitted something to me over coffee one morning, voice barely above a whisper. I don't remember leaving the lot, he said. His fingers trembled over the rim of the cup. Sometimes I wake up in my cruiser, parked at the far end of the yard, engine running, radio on. I don't know how I got there. I think the lot is following me home. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I'd felt it myself. The first time I saw my reflection in the bathroom mirror at home, I barely recognized myself. Eyes wide, pupils too large, skin pale, mouth tight. I felt like I was splitting in two, one version of me awake, the other trapped in that lot, wandering endlessly. Garrett stopped coming to work for 3 days. When he finally returned, he didn't say much. He just sat at his desk, staring at the badge in his hands, turning it over like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. I watched him for hours. I wanted to ask what he'd seen. I wanted to ask what he'd done. But the words felt dangerous. Like speaking aloud might make it worse. The IT was creeping into our waking lives too. The lot's presence lingered in shadows. A parking garage would feel too familiar. Street lights flickering in the fog would make my stomach twist. The sound of gravel under boots would echo in my chest when I wasn't moving at all. The badge, God, the badge became a curse. I could feel its weight whenever I wore it. It wasn't just metal. It was responsibility, memory, guilt, and something else, something cold and patient. It pressed into my ribs, pinched my lungs, whispered in my ear that I was not free, never free. I started noticing little things that didn't make sense. A patrol car parked where it shouldn't be. A shadow at the corner of the office that moved even when I didn't. Lopez would jump at noises I didn't hear. Garrett stopped eating lunch. And every time we passed a cemetery on the ridge, my stomach knotted like I'd swallowed a stone. The headstone of Callahan was still there, plain, innocent looking, and yet I couldn't look at it for long without feeling that pressure again. Like the lot was pulling at me, trying to drag me back into that endless asphalt nightmare point one night. I dreamed something new. I was walking a lot, as always, uniform heavy, heart hammering, and I saw him. Not Callahan, not exactly, but a figure in shadow, standing by the cruiser we'd used at the exhumation. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around him felt wrong, thick, suffocating. I tried to approach. I wanted to run. Both impulses filled me at once. But the lot stretched farther the closer I got. Asphalt became mud, lines faded, light flickered, and he didn't even flinch. He just waited, and I woke up with a taste of dirt in my mouth. Hands scraped as though I'd actually fallen in the dream. I stopped telling anyone about the dreams after that. Talking didn't help. And part of me feared that even thinking about them might make the lot stronger, might pull the three of us further into whatever it was we'd stir by disturbing the grave. Still, we couldn't ignore it. The DA called, curious about delays in the investigation. Harris asked questions that made my stomach tighten. And the truth was, none of us knew how to explain it. How do you tell someone that the lot follows you, that the badge feels like a weight that could crush your chest, that the dead you thought you buried have reached out to claim you, even in dreams? Sleep continued to elude me. Nights blurred into each other. Days became hollow. I'd stare at my hands, at the badge pinned to my chest, and wonder if it was me wearing it, or if it was me being worn by it. Every shadow in my apartment seemed too dark. Every floorboard creak sounded like a footstep on gravel. Every hum of a passing car made my heart skip. And still, the lot waited. The lot remembered. The lot followed. I don't know how much longer I can go on like this. I wake up, I put on a uniform, I drive the patrol routes, I answer the calls. I do everything a deputy is supposed to do, but every step feels like it's not mine. Every glance over my shoulder feels like the shadow of my dream, crouched by a cruiser somewhere, waiting. Sometimes in the dark, I think I hear it. The asphalt cracking, the headlights splitting the fog, and a voice, low and patient, whispering in my ear, "Stay." And I don't know if I'm awake or still trapped in the lot. I didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. I never had. Even after the exhumation, after the empty coffin, after the dreams, I told myself it was stress, imagination, exhaustion. But that night changed something. I was going through my locker in the precinct, just routine, trying to organize the new paperwork, when I found it. A badge. Old, worn, engraved with a name I shouldn't have needed to see again. Thomas Callahan. The edges were dull, the enamel scratched, but unmistakable. My stomach tightened, my fingers trembling as I held it. I didn't know how it got there. My locker was mine alone. I'm the new sheriff now, appointed after Harris retired. Nobody else had access. And yet there was, staring up at me, cold metal reflecting the fluorescent light, heavy with something I couldn't name. I almost put it back, almost told myself it must be a prank, but curiosity, or maybe something darker, made me examine it closer. The name etched there seemed to glint in the light, almost like it was alive. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold air in the station. I slipped it into my pocket. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. The other deputies, Lopez and Garrett, were fragile after the dreams, after the lot. I couldn't risk dragging them into this. The night came. I finished my reports, glanced at the clock, and sighed. It was late. The lot was empty, quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights in the garage. The patrol car waited. I slid in, the seat cold, the vinyl sticky from old sweat and dirt. Then it started on its own. Headlights flicked on. The engine idled. The radio crackled. Static at first, long, drawn out, like it was stretching across time, across space. And then a voice, hoarse and low, cutting to the hum. Shift begins again. I froze. Hands clenched the wheel. My heart thundered in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, to leap out of the car and leave it there, but I couldn't. Some part of me, some part one didn't recognize, forced my fingers to the ignition, to the gear, and the car moved forward. The lot stretched in ways it shouldn't have. I could see the fences, the lights, the patrol vehicles lined up, but the shadows were wrong. They leaned, swayed, and flickered as though the asphalt beneath them had its own pulse, its own life. Every streetlight buzzed, splitting the night into yellow circles, and in each one, I could see something moving just beyond the reach of my vision. A figure crouched by a cruiser, hunched and patient. I didn't recognize it at first, but then I knew it was him. Callahan, or what remained of him, or something wearing his name like a mask. I tried to turn, to drive back to the station, but the lot didn't obey. Roads twisted, lights flickered farther apart. Every turn brought me back to the same place, and I understood with that cold, sinking realization that I wasn't driving anywhere. I was driving into the shift. The radio crackled again. This time it was closer, the voice urgent, insistent, whispering into my skull rather than my ears. Begin, begin, begin. I wanted to fight it, to shut the radio, to rip the ignition from the dashboard, but every movement felt sluggish, like wading through water thick with oil. My hands were metal and lead, my mind fogged, and the lot expanded around me, stretching into impossible angles. The patrol cars were always there, headlights off, engines dead, yet somehow alive, reflecting shadows that didn't belong to anything in the world. I remembered Garrett and Lopez, their dreams, their exhaustion, the way their eyes had looked at me in the station, pleading without words, as though they knew this was coming. The badge in my pocket burned my chest, heavy and cold. It was calling me, tethering me to something I didn't want to touch. And I realized then that it wasn't the badge. It was the weight, the responsibility, the shift. The air smelled of asphalt and rain, though the lot was dry. I could hear the faint scrape of boots over gravel, faint murmurs, echoes of my own footsteps in the patrol lot. I kept trying to focus on reality. It's just a car. It's just a lot. It's just fatigue. But I could feel it pressing in, the walls of the lot breathing, the asphalt folding beneath me, the patrol lights flickering in a rhythm that was almost alive. I tried the radio again, hoping for silence, hoping to break the loop. Only static answered. Then the voice, smoother now, like silk wrapping around my throat. Shift begins again. The lot awaits. I realized I wasn't alone in the car. The reflection in the rear view wasn't mine alone. Shadows twisted behind me. Shapes I could only perceive with the corner of my eye. Crouched low, waiting, I tried to look directly at them. My head felt heavy, spinning, stomach twisting. Every time I blinked, they moved closer, but always just out of reach. I thought about the exhumation, about the coffin, about the empty space that shouldn't exist. And I understood this was what Callahan had become. Not alive, not dead, but tethered, trapped, cursed. And now, I was tethered too. I drove, or at least, the car moved forward. Every time I reached what should have been the exit, the gates, the lights, the fences, the lot shifted. It was endless, infinite. I remembered my own dreams after the exhumation. Lopez, Garrett, the night shift they had described, walking endlessly through that lot. And now, I was living it, and it was worse than any dream, because the dreams, at least, had ended when we woke. This didn't end. The engine hummed, the lights buzzed, and the shadows grew longer, twisting into shapes I didn't want named. I wanted to cry, to scream, to slam the doors and run, but my body obeyed the shift. My hands gripped the wheel, my eyes fixed forward. I was part of it now. The badge on my chest had changed, the car cage, the lot alive and waiting. I saw glimpses of him sometimes. Just a flash. A silhouette by the cruiser. The glint of badge in the dark. The smell of whiskey and wet earth. He didn't move toward me. He didn't need to. I knew he had done this. I knew he had passed it on. And I realized then that this was the cost of the badge, the ship, the lot. I tried calling dispatch. Nothing but static. Tried stepping out of the car. The ground rippled beneath me. Every step forward brought me back. My reflection in the side mirror grinned at me, but it wasn't me. It was hollow, eyes black, teeth too white. And in that reflection, I saw the shift. Endless, merciless, infinite. I thought about quitting. I thought about throwing a badge into the lot, smashing the car, abandoning everything. But even that seemed futile. The weight of it followed me. It had already claimed me, already tethered me, already begun the shift. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I lost track. Time had no meaning here. Only the lot, only the asphalt, only the hum of the engine, only the flicker of the lights, only the voice. Shift begins again. Shift begins again. Shift begins again. I don't remember how many times I drove past the same patrol car, past the same gates, past the same shadows crouched in impossible angles. I only remember the badge burning my chest, heavy with the weight of someone else's life, someone else's mistakes, someone else's curse. At some point, I stopped trying to leave. I stopped trying to fight. I sat, gripping the wheel, eyes forward, listening to the static, listening to the lot, listening to the voice. I became part of it. One more shadow moving through endless asphalt. Another pair of eyes watching, waiting, tethered to the shift. And I knew the truth crystal clear and terrifying. There is no leaving the lot. There is no ending the shift. There is only the drive, the patrol, the endless loop, and the weight of the badge pressing into your chest like a heartbeat that isn't your own. Somewhere just beyond the fog, beyond the flicker of the lights, I could feel him watching, waiting, smiling. And I realized I'd been waiting too, even before the car moved, even before the badge found me, waiting for the shift to begin again. And it did.